He said it as a joke, a stupid throwaway joke, the kind you say at midnight around a fire with a drink in your hand and nowhere serious to be. Maybe I should just marry you. The whole group laughed. She didn't. She looked straight at him, calm as still water, and said four words that stopped every single conversation in that backyard cold. And in that exact moment, Nathan Reed, a man who had spent 4 years convincing himself he was done with love, felt something crack open inside his chest that he was absolutely not ready for. If a story about the moment your whole life quietly shifts direction sounds like something you need tonight, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Nathan Reed had a system. He didn't call it that. He would have rejected the word entirely if someone used it to describe him. Systems were for corporations and cold people, and Nathan liked to think of himself as neither. But the truth was, everything about his daily life had been quietly engineered to keep things predictable, manageable, and safe. He woke at 6:15 every morning. Not 6 o'clock, because that felt militaristic. Not 6:30, because that left the mornings rushed and Lily would end up eating cereal in the car. 6:15 gave him enough time to make coffee, pack her lunch, check the overnight emails he'd ignored, and still feel like a decent father before 8 a.m. He cooked the same 6 dinners on rotation. He kept the apartment clean but not staged. There was always one dish in the sink, always a pair of sneakers by the front door. He paid his bills on the first of the month. He went to bed before 11. He watched exactly 1 hour of television before sleep, usually something with low stakes. Cooking competitions, old procedural dramas, nature documentaries where the worst thing that could happen was that a penguin missed a fish. This was his life at 32. It wasn't bad. That was the thing people never understood when they looked at him with that particular kind of soft pity, that tired, slightly uncomfortable sympathy people reserve for widowers who are still young enough. It wasn't a bad life. It was a quiet one. It was a controlled one. But it was his, and he'd built it carefully from the wreckage of something that had torn him apart, and he wasn't about to apologize for how tightly he held on to it now. Lily was 8 years old and the center of everything. She had her mother's eyes, deep brown, slightly too serious for her age, and Nathan's stubbornness, which he recognized with both pride and occasional despair. She loved piano and hated math and was currently obsessed with a book series about a girl who could communicate with horses. She had already informed Nathan that when she grew up, she was either going to be a marine biologist or a professional chef, and she didn't see why she couldn't do both simultaneously. "You can absolutely do both," Nathan had told her. "You're just saying that." "I'm saying it because it's true." Name one person who does both. He hadn't been able to, which she'd found deeply satisfying. He was raising her the best way he knew how, which was mostly by showing up and trying not to flinch when the hard moments came. There were plenty of those. Lily had been 4 when her mother died, young enough that grief hit her in strange, unpredictable waves rather than all at once. Sometimes she'd go months without bringing Claire up at all, and then suddenly, out of nowhere, she'd get very quiet at dinner and ask something devastating, like, "Did Mommy ever make this?" Or, "Was Mommy good at swimming?" Nathan answered every question as honestly and gently as he could. He kept photos of Claire around the apartment. He never pretended she hadn't existed, never dated with the desperation of someone trying to replace something. He just kept going, one day at a time, in his 6:15 mornings and his rotating dinner menus and his 1 hour of low-stakes television before bed. His friends understood mostly, or they understood as much as people who hadn't lived through it could. They gave him space without abandoning him, which was the rarest and most valuable thing a person could do for someone who was grieving while also trying to function. And somewhere in the middle of all of them, steady, reliable, always there, was Victoria Hayes. Victoria was not someone you overlooked. That wasn't a physical observation, though she was striking in the particular way that self-possessed women in their early 30s often are. Dark hair she kept in a clean knot most days, a habit of direct eye contact, the kind of presence that made rooms feel slightly more organized just by her walking into them. What made her impossible to overlook was the specific quality of her attention. When Victoria listened to you, she actually listened. Not the polite performance of listening that most people deployed in social situations. The nodding, the waiting for their turn to talk, the vague sounds. Victoria listened the way you'd listen to a problem you genuinely intended to solve, It made people feel seen in a way that was, depending on the person, either deeply comforting or slightly unnerving. She was 30 years old and the CEO of a tech company called Meridian, which had, in the 4 years since she'd co-founded it, grown from 12 employees to nearly 400. The growth had been the kind of thing business publications wrote about in breathless terms. But Victoria herself was characteristically undramatic about it. When people asked how she'd built it so fast, she usually said something like, "Hiring well and not pretending to know things I don't know," which was true, but also a significant undersell of the amount of work and sleeplessness and occasional white-knuckled terror involved. She'd met Nathan through mutual friends, through the loose, organic kind of friendship circle that forms in your late 20s in a mid-sized city, built from shared apartments and happy hours and someone's birthday dinner that you attended because you knew one person there and ended up talking to a stranger for 3 hours. That was essentially how Nathan and Victoria had met. A birthday dinner 6 years ago. Someone's mutual friend was turning 26. Nathan had been there with Claire. Victoria had been there alone. The four of them had ended up at the end of a long table talking about something. He couldn't even remember what now, just that it had turned funny somewhere around the second round of drinks, and then unexpectedly sincere by the end of the night. Claire had liked Victoria immediately. "She's the real deal," Claire had said on the drive home, which was about the highest compliment Claire gave anyone. After Claire died, Victoria had been one of the few friends who hadn't disappeared into her own discomfort. Some people, when faced with grief up close, simply vanished. They meant well. They just didn't know what to do. And not knowing what to do felt worse than doing nothing. So they sent a card and gradually reduced contact until the whole friendship quietly dissolved. Victoria had done the opposite. She'd shown up. Not constantly, not suffocatingly. She had the instinct to know when Nathan needed space and when he needed company. She texted regularly. She came over and sat with Lily while Nathan had a breakdown in the bathroom on what would have been Claire's 31st birthday. She never made Nathan feel like a project or a burden or a sad story she was managing. She just treated him like a person who was having an extremely hard time, which was exactly what he was. He called her his best friend. To her face, in front of other people, easily and without any particular weight to it, because that was what she was. That was the box he'd put her in, neatly and without much examination, and then gone on living his life inside the system he'd built. He had no idea she'd been quietly in love with him for almost 3 years. The weekend trip had been Marcus's idea. Marcus Delgado was one of those people who functioned as the social glue of a friend group, always organizing things, always scouting venues, always sending the group text that said, "Listen, I found this place with 3 links attached." He'd found a rental house about 90 minutes outside Seattle, perched on a slight hill with a fire pit in the backyard, and enough bedrooms that 6 adults could sleep comfortably, and nobody had to share a bathroom. There were 6 of them that weekend: Nathan, Victoria, Marcus, his girlfriend, Priya, their friend Jordan, who'd recently gone through a bad breakup and needed, according to Marcus, a change of scenery and several beers, and a woman named Dana, who was Priya's college friend and had met the rest of the group maybe twice before, but whom Priya had vouched for heavily. They arrived Friday evening. The house was exactly what the photos had promised. Worn wood floors, an open kitchen that smelled faintly of pine, a back deck with a view of low hills going orange in the late afternoon light. Marcus had brought an absurd amount of food. Priya had brought wine. Jordan had arrived already slightly defeated looking, in the way only recently dumped people can be, carrying a backpack and a 6-pack of beer like a man heading off to war. The first evening was easy, the way early vacation evenings always are. Everyone slightly loosened by the novelty of the place, the distance from routine. They cooked dinner together in the big kitchen, a chaotic, argumentative, genuinely fun process that involved Marcus and Nathan disagreeing loudly about the correct way to season a pan sauce while Victoria calmly fixed it behind them both without announcing what she was doing. "Did you just—" Nathan started. "Nope," Victoria said, completely deadpan. "You absolutely just fixed the sauce." "I don't know what you're talking about." He'd laughed, genuinely laughed, the kind that came from his chest without warning, and she'd looked sideways at him with that small private smile she had, and something had passed between them that he'd filed away as friendship and moved on. After dinner, they moved to the fire pit. The temperature had dropped, but not enough to drive anyone inside. Just enough to make the fire feel necessary and good. They'd gone through 2 more bottles of wine by this point. The conversation had the particular quality that nighttime conversations around fires tend to develop. Looser, more honest, sliding between genuinely funny and unexpectedly personal with no clear seams between. At some point, the conversation landed on Nathan. He couldn't remember how it started exactly. Something about Marcus making a comment about how Nathan was always the last one to arrive anywhere, which spiraled into a broader roast of his general caution in life, which somehow led to Priya saying, with the cheerful directness of someone on her 3rd glass of Malbec, "I'm just saying, Nathan, at some point you're going to have to let someone in again." "I let plenty of people in," Nathan said. "You have 6 friends," Jordan said flatly, "and one of them is me, and I'm currently in my worst arc. Quality over quantity." "Nathan," Marcus said, leaning forward with a grin that meant he was about to say something Nathan would regret, "when was the last time you went on a date?" The group made the noise groups make when someone asked the question everyone was thinking, a collective intake of breath mixed with laughter, the social equivalent of everyone leaning forward at once. Nathan stared into the fire. "Define date." "See, that's the answer of someone who has absolutely not been on a date." "I've been on dates?" "Name one. Give us a name, a first name even." He opened his mouth, closed it. The group erupted. Nathan shook his head, leaning back in his chair with the resigned expression of a man who knew he'd walked directly into something. "Okay, fine. I'll admit the last year or 2 has been… Look, I'm busy. Lily's schedule alone." "Lily is 8, Jordan said. She goes to bed at 9. "The point is," Marcus said, still grinning, "is that Nathan Reed, 32 years old, is probably going to be a bachelor for the rest of his life because he has literally no interest in putting himself out there." "That's not…" And at this point, Marcus continued, warming to it now, gesturing broadly with his cup, "I think the only person Nathan would ever actually consider marrying would be someone he's already completely comfortable with, someone he doesn't have to do the whole dating anxiety thing with. Someone who would tolerate the 6-dinner rotation," Priya added. "The what?" Dana asked. "He cooks the same 6 meals on a rotating schedule," Victoria said. "He has for 2 years. Nathan pointed at her. "You said you thought it was efficient." "I said it was very you." She smiled into her cup. The group laughed again. Nathan shook his head, laughing despite himself, and in the loose, warm, fire-lit carelessness of the moment, he lifted his cup toward Victoria. Because she was there, because she was safe, because she was the one person in the group who'd never made him feel like a project, and said it. "Maybe I should just marry you." He said it the way you say something that isn't serious. Easy, throwaway, a punchline to the conversation rather than a statement with weight. The group burst out laughing exactly the way he expected them to. Then he looked at Victoria. She hadn't laughed. She was looking directly at him, her expression calm in a way that wasn't quite casual, and she said quietly, clearly, in a voice he would hear in his head for weeks, "I thought you'd never ask." 4 words. Not a joke. He knew immediately it wasn't a joke. In the way you know certain things before you've processed them, a physical recognition, something in the chest before the brain catches up. The laughter around them stopped the way laughter stops when something shifts the atmosphere of a room. Not sharply, not dramatically. It just drained away. Dana looked at Priya. Priya looked at Marcus. Marcus, for the first time that Nathan could remember, had absolutely nothing to say. Nathan stared at Victoria. She held his gaze for exactly 2 seconds. Then she took a slow, unhurried sip from her cup, looked out toward the dark tree line at the edge of the yard, and said calmly and without apparent self-consciousness, "More wine, anyone?" The conversation restarted, shakily, and eventually found its feet again. Someone changed the topic. Jordan made a joke that was a little too loud. The fire popped. The night continued. But Nathan couldn't feel the warmth of it anymore. He sat there, cup in hand, replaying those 4 words with the particular, helpless focus of a mind that has grabbed onto something and refuses to let go. "I thought you'd never ask." The tone of it, the steadiness, the fact that she hadn't blushed, hadn't laughed it off, hadn't given him any of the social escape routes that would have let both of them pretend it was nothing. He didn't look at her again for the rest of the night. Not because he was avoiding her, but because he was genuinely afraid of what he'd see in his own face if he did. They packed up Sunday afternoon. The house was left clean. They were all considerate people, the kind who do their own dishes at someone else's place. Marcus and Priya loaded their car first and left early because Marcus had an early meeting Monday. Dana and Jordan left together, making politely vague plans to do this again sometime, which left Nathan and Victoria, who had driven up together because they always did, and who now stood in the driveway beside Nathan's car in the pale afternoon light with 2 overnight bags at their feet and a silence between them that had never been there before. "Ready?" Nathan said. "Ready," Victoria said. They drove for 45 minutes without talking. Not uncomfortable silence. They'd done comfortable silence before, many times, a Sunday drive home with the radio low and nothing pressing to say. But this wasn't that. This was the specific weight of 2 people not talking because they both knew what they weren't saying, and neither was ready to say it. Nathan kept his eyes on the highway. He had the radio on. Some alternative station playing something he wasn't actually listening to. Victoria had her elbow on the window ledge, her chin in her hand, watching the landscape flatten as they came back toward the city. "So," Nathan said finally, "about 20 minutes out from Seattle." "So," Victoria said. Not combative, not nervous, just steady. "Last night." "Yes." "The thing you said." "Yes." He changed lanes, checked his mirror, checked it again for no reason. "Were you—" He stopped, tried again. "I mean, did you mean—" "Nathan." Her voice was patient but firm. "You're a smart man. Ask a better question." He breathed. "Did you mean it?" A pause. Not long. Maybe 3 seconds. "Yes," she said. Simple as that. No elaboration, no defensive armor, no preemptive apology, just the word, sitting there in the front seat between them, taking up space. He didn't say anything for a long moment. The city limits sign went past. The highway started to fill with Sunday evening traffic, people heading back to their lives. "How long?" he finally said. His voice came out quieter than he intended. Victoria looked at the dashboard. "Long enough that I probably should have said something before now." A small, dry, almost laugh. "Or never." I also considered never. "Why didn't you?" "Because you were, She stopped, started again. "You had enough. You were holding a lot. I didn't want to add to that weight." Nathan sat with that. The honesty of it. The specificity. This wasn't something she'd thought up in the last 48 hours. This was something she'd lived with and turned over and made a decision about. "And now?" he said. She looked at him then. He could see it in his peripheral vision, though he kept his eyes on the road. "Now I said a thing I can't unsay," she said, "and I'm genuinely fine with that." He pulled off the highway at his exit, navigated the last 10 minutes home through familiar streets in silence, parked in front of his building, turned the engine off. They sat in the parked car for a moment. The Sunday evening street was quiet around them. A couple walking a dog, a kid on a bike weaving down the sidewalk. "I need to think," Nathan said. He said it honestly, not as a way to close the conversation, but because it was precisely true. He needed to think. His brain was doing something chaotic and unfamiliar, and he didn't know what the output was yet. "Take your time," Victoria said. She opened the car door, pulled her bag from the back seat, and then paused. Looked at him one more time with that direct, unhurried gaze of hers. "Nathan, nothing has to change if you don't want it to. I meant every word, but I'm not putting pressure on your life, okay?" "Okay," he said. She nodded once, closed the door, walked up the street toward where she'd parked her own car 2 days ago, Friday evening, before everything was different. Nathan sat in his parked car for 11 minutes. He knew because he watched the clock. He wasn't doing anything, not thinking in any structured way, not making lists or weighing options. He was just sitting with the unfamiliar, unsettling, quietly electrifying feeling that something had just happened to him that his system had absolutely no protocol for. He didn't call her Monday. He also didn't call her Tuesday, though he thought about it enough times that it probably should have counted for something. He went to work. He picked Lily up from school. He made dinner, chicken stir-fry, which was Thursday's meal, but it was only Wednesday, which meant even his rotation was off, which felt somehow significant. He helped Lily with a worksheet on fractions, during which she informed him that fractions were literally the worst thing humans invented, a position he found reasonable but couldn't officially endorse. He put her to bed. He sat on the couch. He turned on the television. He did not watch it. What he did was think about Victoria, not the conversation in the car, or not only that. He thought about 6 years of friendship. He thought about specific moments that were reassembling themselves in his mind with slightly different lighting now. The way she always remembered things he mentioned in passing. A book he'd said he wanted to read, a restaurant he'd thought about trying, the name of Lily's piano teacher, and worked them into conversations weeks later as if they'd been sitting with her. The way she'd shown up at his apartment with grocery bags the night after Claire's first death anniversary, without asking, without calling ahead, just showing up because she'd put the date in her calendar and decided he probably shouldn't be alone. The way she laughed, not the controlled public laugh she used at work events, but the real one, the one that involved her whole face and sometimes made her lose track of what she was saying. He'd known all of this. He'd been present for all of it. He just hadn't let himself know what it meant, because knowing what it meant would have required him to open a door he'd bolted shut from the inside 4 years ago, and he'd been very careful about that door. Wednesday night, he typed out a text message to Victoria. "Hey, can we talk?" He stared at it for a while, deleted it, typed it again, stared at it again, sent it. Her response came 11 minutes later. "Yes." "Waterfront Thursday evening? 7 o'clock. "Not of course. Not what took you so long. Not a single punctuation mark of anxiety. Just a place and a time, like a woman who had already decided where she stood and was simply waiting to see where he'd land." He texted back, "I'll be there." He went to bed at 10:45, which was later than usual. He did not put on the television. He lay in the dark in his quiet apartment and listened to the city outside the window and thought about a woman who'd sat beside him for 6 years in the exact middle distance between close and closer. And for the first time in a very long time, the quiet didn't feel like relief. It felt like the night before something. Seattle's waterfront at 7 p.m. on a Thursday in autumn is not a romantic setting in any obvious way. The tourist ferries have run their last routes. The fish market is closed. There are still people out, joggers, couples walking dogs, a man sitting on a bench eating something out of a paper bag. But it has that particular quiet of a place that has finished its public day and isn't quite sure what to do with the evening. Nathan got there early. He stood at the railing above the water, watching the lights of the Sound, hands in his jacket pockets. He changed his shirt twice before leaving the house. He hadn't told himself it was because of Victoria. He told himself the first shirt had a stain on it, and the second one felt too formal, and the third one was the right one. He was aware, distantly, that this was a lie he was telling himself. He heard her footsteps on the boards before he turned around. He recognized the particular rhythm of them. Unhurried, deliberate. "Hi," she said. "Hi." She came to stand beside him at the railing, looking out at the water. She was wearing a dark coat he'd seen before, her hair down for once rather than pinned back. She looked, he thought, exactly like herself, which was not a small thing. "Cold," she said. "Yeah." They stood there for a moment. A ferry's lights moved slowly across the dark water in the middle distance. "I've been trying to figure out what to say," Nathan said. "Take your time." "That's the thing. I've had 3 days and I still don't entirely know what I'm saying." He turned to look at her. "But I know I needed to see you in person because that drive home was heavy," she said. "Yeah." He paused. "Victoria, how long has this been?" 2.5 years, she said. Clean, no hesitation, like she'd had the number ready. Give or take. He absorbed this. 2.5 years. He tried to trace it back, what had been happening 2.5 years ago. Lily had just started first grade. He'd been in the middle of a project at work that had consumed most of his attention for 6 months. He'd been busy, distracted, running on routine, and Victoria had been falling in love with him. "Why didn't you—" he started. "I told you in the car." Her voice was calm, not defensive. "You were carrying enough. And honestly," she stopped, pressed her lips together briefly. "Honestly, I wasn't sure it would ever be the right time, and I made peace with that. I told myself I'd rather have you as my best friend than not have you at all, and I meant it. And then the fire pit happened." A short, reluctant, almost laugh. "And then the fire pit happened." She shook her head slightly. "I had every intention of laughing along with everyone else. I don't know what—" She stopped again, looked at the water. "Your face." When you said it, there was something in your face that I... She stopped herself. Anyway, it doesn't matter. What matters is I said it and you heard it, and here we are. Nathan turned to face her more fully. She turned to look at him. I don't know exactly what I'm feeling, he said. The words came out rougher than he intended, more honest. I want to be fair to you. I don't want to say something that... I don't want to do what people do, where they say the thing and then they change their mind and somebody gets hurt. I've watched that happen. He paused. I don't want to do that to you. Victoria looked at him for a long moment. Her expression had something in it he couldn't fully read. Something that was fond and tired and gentle all at once. Nathan, she said, I'm not asking you to be certain. I'm not asking you for a declaration. I've had 2.5 years to sit with this. You've had 72 hours. The corner of her mouth moved barely. I'm just asking you to be honest with me about what you're actually feeling, not what you think is the right thing to feel. He looked out at the water. A long pause. I feel like I've been walking around for 3 days with something running underneath everything, he said. Every conversation I had this week, it was there. Every time I thought about calling you, it was there. He paused. And I don't know if it's what you're hoping for. But it's not nothing. Victoria was quiet for a moment. The fairy light moved along the horizon. It's not nothing, she said softly. That's enough for now. They stayed at the railing for another hour. They talked, carefully, honestly, with long pauses that they both sat with rather than filling. It wasn't a romantic conversation in any easy sense. It was two people who knew each other very well, trying to figure out if the thing that made them good friends could become something else without breaking everything. By the time they walked back toward the parking lot, nothing had been decided. There was no neat resolution, no pivotal kiss in the docklights. Nathan felt something in him that was complicated and real, and not remotely like any love story he'd ever watched on the television shows he used to fall asleep to. He called her a cab because her car was parked in the other direction, and it was getting late. While they waited, standing in the orange streetlight outside the market's closed gate, he looked at her and said, I want to try. I'm not promising I know how to do this right. I'm probably going to get things wrong. Victoria looked at him steadily. So will I. Okay? Okay, she said. The cab pulled up. She opened the door, then turned back once, her hand on the roof of the car. Nathan, yeah. The dinner rotation. Her expression was carefully neutral. We're going to need to expand it. 6 meals is not enough for 2 people. He stared at her. She got in the cab. He stood on the sidewalk watching the cab's taillights disappear down the block, and he laughed. A sudden, surprised, completely unguarded laugh that echoed off the closed storefronts around him. It was the first time in 3 days that his chest didn't feel tight. He walked back to his car in the cold evening air, hands in his pockets, thinking that this was either the beginning of something extraordinary or the beginning of a very complicated mistake, and that either way, he was in it now. He found, somewhat to his own surprise, that he was okay with that. The first date nearly didn't happen. Not because either of them changed their mind, but because Nathan spent the entire week after the waterfront conversation quietly panicking in a way he would never have admitted out loud. He went to work. He picked Lily up. He cooked dinner. He sat on the couch at night staring at his phone with Victoria's name on the screen, cursor blinking in an empty text field, and thought about all the ways this could go sideways. The fear wasn't irrational, which was what made it hard to argue with. It had logic behind it. Victoria was his best friend. She was the person he called when Lily had a fever at 2 a.m., and he didn't know if it was bad enough for the emergency room. She was the person who showed up at his door on the anniversaries. She was woven into his life in a way that most people simply weren't, and if he pulled on that thread wrong, he wasn't just risking a breakup. He was risking the whole fabric. He knew this. He sat with it. He made his coffee at 6:15 and packed Lily's lunch and checked his emails and tried to think about it like a reasonable adult, which worked moderately well until he would remember the way Victoria had looked at him at the waterfront, that direct, patient, completely undefended look. And then reason stopped being particularly useful. On Thursday, exactly 1 week after the waterfront, his phone buzzed at 7:45 p.m. while he was washing dishes. I found a restaurant. Small Italian place in Capitol Hill. Saturday, 7 o'clock. No pressure, but the pasta is genuinely excellent, and I think you need to eat something that isn't one of your 6 meals." He read it twice, dried his hands on the dish towel, stood in his kitchen for about 30 seconds. Then he typed back, "Saturday at 7. I'll be there." Her response was a single period, which was, he was learning, Victoria's version of a smile. He put the phone down on the counter and noticed, somewhat against his will, that the tightness in his chest had loosened a little. Saturday arrived with the particular slow cruelty of days you're anxious about. Nathan dropped Lily at Marcus and Priya's. They'd offered without being asked, because they both knew what was happening and were, to their credit, containing their excitement to a degree that was probably costing them something, and drove to Capitol Hill with 15 minutes to spare, which meant he ended up sitting in his car outside the restaurant for 12 of them. The place was small, maybe 20 tables. The kind of restaurant that doesn't take reservations for parties under 4 and smells like garlic and old wood and olive oil the moment you open the door. Victoria was already there when he walked in, seated at a corner table with a glass of water and a menu she wasn't reading. She looked up when he came in. "You're 2 minutes early." "I was in the car for 12. "I know, I saw you pull up." She said it without judgment, with something that might have been affection. "Sit down, Nathan." He sat. The waiter came and he ordered wine mostly because he needed something to do with his hands. Victoria already had water, which was somehow very her. She'd probably already mapped the menu and decided what she wanted and was simply waiting without needing anything to do. "This is weird," Nathan said once the waiter had gone. "A little," Victoria agreed. "We've eaten dinner together probably 200 times. At least. And I'm nervous." She looked at him over the rim of her water glass. "So am I." That surprised him. He hadn't expected that. Victoria's particular quality of composure made it easy to assume she was unaffected by things, and then occasionally she'd say something like that with total simplicity, and he'd realize he'd been wrong. "You don't seem nervous," he said. "I've had more practice hiding it." A pause. "Also, I got here 20 minutes early and sat in the bathroom for 5 of them, so—" He laughed. She laughed. And something in the evening loosened. They talked for 3 hours. Not about the fire pit, not about the waterfront, not about any of the careful, weighted conversations of the past 2 weeks. They talked the way they always talked, easily, honestly, with the comfortable shorthand of people who'd been paying attention to each other for years. He told her about a meeting at work that had gone sideways in a way that was too absurd to be genuinely upsetting. She told him about a hiring problem at Meridian that was keeping her up at night. A VP she'd trusted who was turning out to be a different person under pressure than she'd thought in the interview room. "What are you going to do?" he asked. "I already had the conversation," she said. "I told him what I was seeing. Either he adjusts or he doesn't, and if he doesn't, I'll make the hard call." She said it matter-of-factly, without relish. "I hate firing people, but I hate letting it fester more. When did you get so decisive?" She tilted her head slightly. "I've always been decisive. You've just never watched me work." He thought about that. It was true. He knew Victoria in the context of their friendship, their friend group, the particular texture of their shared social world, not in the context of who she was in a boardroom or a difficult conversation with someone she employed. He knew her laugh and her silences and the fact that she put too much pepper on everything, but there were entire dimensions of her that he'd never had access to. The idea of having access to them did something strange and good to him. He drove her to her car after dinner. They stood on the sidewalk in the October cold, the restaurant's warm light spilling out onto the pavement behind them. "That was good," he said. "It was," she agreed. "The pasta was, as advertised, excellent." "I don't make empty promises about pasta." He looked at her for a moment. The streetlight caught the side of her face. She was looking back at him steadily, not pushing, not pulling back, just present. "Can I do this again?" he said. "Take you to dinner, properly. Again." Victoria's expression did something subtle, a softening around the eyes, something that wasn't quite a smile but was in the same family. "Yes," she said. "You can." He waited until she'd gotten into her car and pulled out before he walked back to his own. He sat behind the wheel and realized he was grinning like an idiot, which he found both embarrassing and completely impossible to stop. He drove home in the dark, radio low, and thought that maybe, he had not been as done with certain things as he'd believed. The weeks that followed had a quality he couldn't name at first. Not the sharp, disorienting thing of the fire pit weekend. Not the careful, heavy thing of the waterfront. Something else. Something that arrived gradually, the way a change in weather arrives. Not all at once, but in degrees, until one morning you look out the window and realize the season has already shifted. They started spending more time together. Not in the structured, deliberate way of people who are dating formally, but in the organic, slightly unplanned way of two people whose separate lives kept finding reasons to overlap. A Thursday evening walk, because Nathan had texted saying he needed to get out of the apartment and Victoria had happened to be free. A Saturday afternoon that started as coffee and turned into 4 hours at a bookstore where Victoria picked books off shelves and handed them to him without explanation. And he read the back covers and put some back and tucked some under his arm, and at the end of it he'd bought 4 novels and a collection of essays and felt, obscurely, like he'd been given a window into how her mind worked. "You bought the Didion," she said at the register. "You handed it to me twice." "That was an accident. You accidentally handed me the same book twice." She looked at the ceiling briefly. "Just read it." He read it. It was very good. He texted her at 11 p.m. when he finished the first essay and said, "Okay, I see what you mean," and her response was a single "told you," and somehow that exchange, that small, completely unremarkable exchange, made him feel more seen than most full conversations he'd had in the past 2 years. The first time Victoria came over to the apartment while Lily was home, Nathan had staged it as casually as he could manage, which is to say, he'd briefed Lily the night before with the particular mix of honest and age-appropriate that parenting constantly demanded. "Victoria's coming over Saturday to help me look at something in the kitchen," he said. "The cabinet situation." Lily looked at him with those brown eyes. "The cabinets are fine, Dad." "They're not fine, actually. You like her," Lily said, bluntly, the way 8-year-olds say things, without any awareness that this was supposed to be subtle. Like her. Nathan blinked. We're friends, Lily. Marcus and Priya are friends. You don't look at Priya like that." "Like what?" "Like when she texts you and your face does the thing." "My face doesn't do a thing." "Oh." Lily gave him the look of a person who is 8 years old and has nonetheless been watching adults closely her entire life and knows exactly what she's seen. "Dad, it's okay." She went back to her book. "Victoria's nice. I like her." Nathan stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment. "When did you get this perceptive?" "I've always been perceptive," she said, without looking up. "You just never noticed." He stood there, struck, because she had used almost exactly Victoria's words. The echo of it sat with him in a way he couldn't immediately explain. Victoria arrived Saturday afternoon with a bottle of sparkling water and a box of pastries from a bakery in her neighborhood, because she was constitutionally incapable of arriving at someone's home empty-handed. Lily, who had been conspicuously occupied with her book in the living room, appeared in the kitchen doorway approximately 45 seconds after the front door opened. "Hi, Victoria." "Hey, Lily. You look taller." "I grew half an inch since September," said with genuine pride. "The doctor measured me." "That's significant." Victoria said it with complete seriousness, not the slightly condescending brightness adults sometimes used with kids. "What are you reading?" Lily held up the book. Victoria looked at the cover, and her expression shifted into genuine interest. "Is that the third one?" "Fourth." "Wait, is this the one where she finally goes back to the island?" Lily's eyes widened. "You've read these?" "I read the first 2 last year. I didn't know the 4th one was out." She looked at Nathan, slightly accusatory. "You didn't tell me there was a 4th one. I didn't know you read those." "There's a lot you don't know about me," Victoria said lightly, which landed with an entirely different weight than it would have a month ago. She turned back to Lily. "Can I borrow it when you're done?" Lily looked at her with the careful, appraising look she reserved for people she was deciding about. Then she said, "You can have my copy. I have the libraries too, and I read fast." Nathan watched this exchange from the other side of the kitchen counter. He watched Lily, who was not an easy child to impress, who had inherited Claire's instinct for reading people and was not shy about sharing her assessments, extend this small offering to Victoria. And he watched Victoria receive it with exactly the right amount of warmth. Not too effusive, not casual to the point of dismissive. Just right. Something in his chest moved in a way he was getting more familiar with. The three of them ended up eating lunch together, the pastries and leftover soup Nathan had made Friday, and the conversation found a shape that surprised him. Lily asked Victoria questions about her company with the directness of a child who had not yet learned to be polite about curiosity, and Victoria answered them honestly and without simplification, and Lily followed up with questions that Nathan was fairly sure most adults wouldn't have thought of. "Do you ever regret starting it?" Lily asked. She was pulling apart a croissant, not looking up, which Nathan recognized as her way of asking something she thought might be complicated. Victoria considered this for a real moment. "Sometimes I regret specific decisions I made inside it," she said. "But the starting it part? No. What if it failed? I thought about that before I started. I decided I'd rather fail at something I chose than not try and always wonder." Lily nodded slowly, processing this. "My teacher says you should always have a backup plan." "Your teacher isn't wrong," Victoria said, "but sometimes the backup plan can become an excuse not to commit to the first one." Lily looked up at her then, really looked at her. "Dad never says stuff like that. Your dad says plenty of good stuff. He just says different things." Nathan, who had been listening to this entire exchange, said nothing. He refilled his water glass. He looked out the kitchen window at the gray October sky. He thought about a woman who had known him for 6 years, who had watched him grieve and rebuild and go quiet and come partway back, and who had spent 2.5 years loving him without requiring anything in return, and who was now sitting at his kitchen table having a genuine conversation with his daughter about ambition and backup plans and committing to the things you choose. He thought, "I have been very slow," and then more quietly, maybe that was necessary. They fell into a rhythm over the weeks that followed. Not a dramatic rhythm, not a movie montage of romantic gestures and sweeping moments. The real thing was smaller and more uneven than that. Some evenings were genuinely good, easy and warm and clarifying, the kind of time together that made Nathan feel like something inside him was slowly coming back online. Other evenings were awkward in the specific way of two people who know each other too well to perform, but are still figuring out the new shape of what they are. He said the wrong thing once, something dismissive about the stress of her company's growth, a moment of thoughtlessness that he recognized the second it came out of his mouth, and she went quiet in a way that was distinctly not her usual comfortable quiet. "That was—" he started. "I know you didn't mean it badly," she said. "I didn't, but it still came out badly, and I'm sorry." She looked at him. "Okay. Are you actually okay, or are you saying okay?" She stopped, pressed her fingertips to the bridge of her nose briefly. "I'm a little both." And then after a pause, "I know that what I do looks like it's going well from the outside, and mostly it is. But there are weeks where I'm holding a lot, and I don't always feel like I can say that." "You can say it to me," Nathan said. You can always say it." "I know." A beat. "It's just a habit. Managing what I show people. It's hard to turn off. I've noticed," he said, and then, carefully, "I'm not one of your employees. You don't have to manage what you show me." She looked at him for a moment with an expression he couldn't entirely read, something complicated and a little raw. "I know," she said again, softer this time. "I'm working on it." These moments, the imperfect ones, the slightly bruised ones, turned out to matter as much as the easy evenings. Maybe more. Because each time they navigated one, something between them settled a little deeper, like stones finding their places in a riverbed. There was a night, late November, when they ended up watching a movie at her apartment, a thing that had happened dozens of times before, but felt different now in all the small ways that things were feeling different. Her apartment was warm and smelled like the candles she always burned in the evenings, something that wasn't quite vanilla and wasn't quite sandalwood. They were on the couch, the space between them having been slowly, barely consciously, closing over the weeks. The movie was something she'd picked, a 1990s drama that Nathan had never seen, and she apparently loved without being able to entirely explain why. Halfway through, she leaned slightly into his side. Not dramatically, just a small shift of weight. He felt it through his shoulder and his rib cage and did not move. He became acutely aware of her breathing, of the warmth of her, of the specific weight of her presence beside him, which was a thing he'd been physically near hundreds of times and was now experiencing completely differently, which was dizzying in a way he wouldn't have predicted. The movie continued. Some scene played out. An argument, a reconciliation. He was following approximately 40% of the plot. The rest of his attention was on the woman sitting beside him, and on the thing inside his chest that had been slowly, steadily, undeniably growing since a fire-lit backyard, and 4 unexpected words. When the credits rolled, neither of them moved immediately. "Good movie," he said eventually. "I think you missed most of it. I got the important parts." She turned her head to look up at him. They were close in a way that the evening had arrived at gradually, and now that they were here, it felt both surprising and exactly right. Her eyes were dark and direct, and there was no performance in them, no calculated softness, just her, looking at him. "Nathan," she said. "Yeah. You can stop thinking so hard." He almost laughed. Almost. Instead, he looked at her, really looked at her, without the careful managed distance he'd been maintaining for weeks, and did what he'd been slowly working up to without fully knowing it. He kissed her. It was not the kind of kiss that happens in the climax of a movie. It was quieter than that, and slightly uncertain and brief. He pulled back after a moment and looked at her. She looked back at him with an expression he'd never seen on her face before. Not composed, not managed, just open in a way that Victoria Hayes almost never was. A little undone, in the best possible way. "Hi," he said stupidly. "Hi," she said. And then she laughed. The real laugh. The one that took over her face. And he laughed too, and she leaned her forehead briefly against his shoulder, and he sat very still because he wanted to hold that particular moment for as long as it would stay. The weeks that came after were not perfect. He'd expected that, intellectually, but it still caught him sometimes. There were mornings after good evenings where he woke with a low current of anxiety that he couldn't entirely name, not doubt about Victoria specifically, but something older and harder to locate. The particular fear of someone who has loved deeply and lost that love and built a careful structure around the wound. His therapist, whom he saw once a month, said this was not pathological. "It just means you know what's at stake," she told him. "That's not the same as not being ready." He thought about that a lot. Victoria, for her part, was patient in a way that had nothing passive in it. She wasn't waiting for him to be ready in the way someone waits for a thing they're not sure will come. She was present, engaged, fully herself, and she gave him room without giving him distance. It was a delicate balance that she managed without appearing to manage it, which was, he was starting to understand, one of the central qualities of who she was. One Saturday afternoon, Lily came home from a piano recital. Nathan had been there, front row, Victoria beside him, to find that Victoria had somehow, in the 2 minutes between arriving at the apartment and Lily coming through the door, assembled a celebratory spread of Lily's specific favorite snacks on the kitchen counter. The particular brand of crackers she liked, the sliced apples she preferred with peanut butter, the sparkling apple juice she'd once mentioned she thought was more special than regular juice because it's fancy but it's for kids. Lily stood in the kitchen doorway and stared at the counter. Then she looked at Victoria. "How did you know?" she asked. "I paid attention," Victoria said simply. Lily was quiet for a second. Nathan watched his daughter's face do the thing it did when she was absorbing something she would sit with for a long time. Then Lily walked over to the counter, picked up a cracker, and said without looking up, "You can stay for dinner if you want." It wasn't a formal invitation. It was something more than that. A small girl with her mother's eyes and her father's stubbornness, offering the thing she had to offer in the way that mattered most to her. Victoria looked at Nathan across the kitchen. He shrugged with one shoulder. "Your call." "I'd like that," Victoria said. "I'll help cook." "Dad will burn it," Lily said helpfully. "I won't," Nathan started. "He burned it last Tuesday," Lily told Victoria. "I know," Victoria said. "He texted me about it." Lily looked between them both with the long-suffering expression of a child surrounded by adults who think they're keeping secrets and aren't. "You text each other a lot," she said. "We do," Victoria agreed. Lily ate a cracker. "Okay," she said, apparently settling something internally. "You should stay for dinner," Nathan stood in his kitchen while his daughter drifted back toward the living room with her snacks and looked at Victoria, who was already opening the refrigerator and scanning its contents with the focused expression of someone who genuinely enjoyed the problem of making dinner from what was available. He thought about the fire pit, the joke that wasn't a joke, the 72 hours he'd spent in quiet panic, the waterfront at 7 o'clock with the fairy lights moving across the dark water, the bookstore and the 4 novels and the Didion she'd handed him twice on purpose. He thought about how love, when it actually arrives, not the convenient story version of it, not the version with dramatic music, feels less like a lightning strike and more like a room gradually filling with light. So gradual you can't identify the exact moment it got bright. Only that it did, and now you can see things you couldn't see before. He crossed the kitchen, leaned against the counter beside her, and looked at the refrigerator's contents. "There's leftover chicken," he said. "I see it. And half an onion." Also seeing that. "If you tell me you can make something good out of that, I'm going to find it unreasonably impressive." She glanced sideways at him. "Go set the table." He set the table. From the living room, he could hear Lily playing something quietly on her keyboard. Not practicing, just playing around, the loose improvised things she did when she was in a good mood. Victoria was in the kitchen, opening and closing cabinet doors, running water, the ordinary sounds of someone making dinner in a space they were starting to know. Nathan folded 3 napkins and placed them on the table and stood in the middle of his apartment. His small, carefully arranged, system-built apartment that had been just a place to be safe in for 4 years, and felt it, clearly and without much ceremony. This was starting to feel like a home again. He wasn't done being scared. He wasn't done being careful. He still woke some mornings with the old anxiety, the old awareness of how much it cost when things broke. He was not, and would not pretend to be, a man who had resolved all of that neatly and moved forward without weight. But he was here. He was present. He was setting a table for 3 in an apartment that smelled like whatever Victoria was cooking, while his daughter played loose and happy notes in the next room. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like more than enough. The chicken Victoria made that Saturday turned out to be genuinely excellent, which Nathan found both impressive and faintly irritating in the affectionate way that things about her were starting to irritate him. The kind of irritation that was really just admiration wearing a slightly defensive coat. "You can't just do that," he said, pointing at his plate. "Do what?" "Make a good meal out of leftover chicken and half an onion. There were also garlic cloves and some white wine you had open. That wine was for drinking. Now it's for eating." She said it without looking up. "Finish your plate." Lily, who had eaten 2 full servings and was now regarding her fork with the contemplative expression of someone considering a third, said, "It's better than the chicken Dad makes." "Thank you, Lily," Nathan said. "That's not a compliment to you specifically," Lily told him. "It's just an observation." Victoria pressed her lips together in a way that was clearly suppressing something. Nathan pointed at her. "Don't." "I didn't say anything." "You were thinking very loudly." "That's not a thing." This was December, 7 weeks after the waterfront, 4 weeks after the movie and the kiss on her couch that had been quiet and uncertain and had somehow mattered more than 100 more dramatic things could have. The relationship, if that was the right word for it yet, and Nathan still wasn't entirely sure it was, though he was increasingly unable to think of a better one, had arrived at something that felt cautiously like a real shape. Not a final shape, not a settled shape, but real. December moved the way Decembers in Seattle move, gray and wet and punctuated by specific warm pockets of light, the kind of month where staying inside feels earned. Nathan and Victoria fell into a pattern that was partly new and partly just an extension of what they'd always been, except now there were things in the pattern that had never been there before. The way she would sometimes stop talking mid-sentence and look at him for a beat too long, with an expression that was hard to categorize but that he was starting to recognize as simply hers. The way he'd started saving things up to tell her throughout the day. Small things, unimportant things. A conversation he'd overheard on the bus. Something Lily had said that was funny. An email from a coworker that was so passive-aggressive it had achieved a kind of art. He saved them the way you save things for someone specific, which is different from just storing them generally. They were at the farmer's market one Saturday morning, a thing they'd done together before, but which was now undeniably different in its texture. When Victoria stopped in front of a stall selling holiday wreaths and went quiet in the particular way that meant something had moved in her, Nathan stopped beside her. "What?" She shook her head slightly. "Nothing. My mom used to make these, the pine and eucalyptus kind." She looked at the wreaths for another moment. She had a whole system. She'd do it the first weekend of December every year. She'd put on the same Frank Sinatra Christmas record, and she'd make the wreath on the kitchen table, and my sister and I would sit there watching her, and she'd let us add the ribbon at the end. Nathan had known Victoria for 6 years. He had known her mother had died, cancer, 3 years before they met. And he knew Victoria didn't talk about her often. He waited. "I haven't made a wreath since she died," Victoria said. "I keep meaning to. Every year I mean to." "So let's make one," Nathan said. She looked at him. "Now? I mean, we'd have to buy supplies, but this weekend, Saturday, the 3 of us." She looked at him in a way that was slightly startled, like she hadn't expected the offer and hadn't prepared a response to it. "You don't have to." "Victoria, I want to." He said it simply. "Do you want to?" A pause. Something in her face shifted. A softening so brief he almost missed it. "Yeah," she said. "I do." They bought the eucalyptus and the pine cuttings and the wire and the ribbon from the stall, the woman selling them giving them a set of instructions that were either very helpful or incomprehensible depending on your existing knowledge of wreath construction. And that Saturday afternoon, the 3 of them sat around Nathan's kitchen table with materials spread everywhere and a Frank Sinatra Christmas album playing from his phone because Victoria had said she needed it and Nathan had pulled it up without being asked. It was messy. Lily kept bending the wire in the wrong direction and getting frustrated with herself, and Nathan had zero intuitive understanding of how wreaths were structurally supposed to work. And Victoria, who had apparently retained more of her mother's technique than she'd thought, was directing both of them with increasing precision while also clearly trying not to laugh. "That's not how you—" "Nathan, that branch is going to fall off." "It looks fine." "It absolutely will not stay." "You don't know that." "I do, actually, know that." She reached across and adjusted the branch with deft, certain hands. "Like this. See? Now it'll hold." Lily leaned over and examined his work. "The other side is better," she said. "The other side is the side Victoria did," Nathan said. "Exactly," Lily said. Nathan looked at the ceiling briefly. Victoria made a sound he chose to interpret as sympathy. At the end of it, they had a wreath that was imperfect in the way handmade things always are. Slightly lopsided, one section denser than the others. The ribbon tied by Lily in a bow that was enthusiastic, if not technically correct. Victoria held it up and turned it in her hands, examining it. Something in her expression was both careful and open. "It's good," she said. Not in the polite way, in the real way. "It's a little lopsided," Nathan said. "That's why it's good." She looked at it a moment longer. "My mom always said the ones that looked too perfect were made by people who were more worried about how it looked than the making of it." She hung it on Nathan's front door. He watched her do it. The small, sure movements of her hands, her hair falling slightly forward as she adjusted the angle, Frank Sinatra still coming faintly from the phone on the kitchen table, and felt the specific weight of what he was starting to understand about her. That underneath the composure and the competence and the quality of presence that made rooms reorganize themselves around her, there was a woman who was also lonely in ways she didn't advertise, who had lost her mother before she'd started the thing that had defined the last 4 years of her life, who had spent 2.5 years in love with someone and made room for that love quietly and without complaint. She stepped back and looked at the wreath on the door. Lily appeared at Nathan's elbow, looking up at it. "It's good," Lily pronounced. "Better than the store ones." "Your mom would have liked you," Victoria said to Lily quietly. It came out before she seemed to have decided to say it, and she blinked slightly, as if surprised by her own words. Lily looked up at her. "Did you know her?" "Not well. We met a few times. She was kind." Victoria said it carefully, with the gentleness you use when you're handling something you don't want to break. "She paid attention to people. You do that too." Lily was quiet for a moment. "Dad says that's from her." "Then it's a good thing to have from her," Victoria said. Nathan stood in the hallway of his apartment, and did not say anything because there was nothing he could say into that moment that wouldn't diminish it. He just stood there while his daughter and this woman stood together, looking at a lopsided handmade wreath on his front door, Frank Sinatra playing softly in the background, and felt something loosen in the very center of him. Not break, not the sharp crack of grief, just release, slowly, like a breath you've been holding so long you've forgotten you were holding it. Christmas came. The holidays had always been a complicated season for Nathan. The warmth of them cut through with the specific absence, the place at every gathering where something was missing. He'd gotten better at it over 4 years. The first Christmas after Claire had nearly leveled him. Each one since had been more manageable, not because the loss diminished, but because he'd gotten more practiced at carrying it. He'd learned to let the good parts be good without bracing against them. This Christmas had more good parts than he could account for. Victoria spent Christmas Eve with her sister's family in Portland, which was where she always went, and Nathan was glad she had that. The wreath afternoon had shown him something about how much she carried quietly, and he wanted her to have the thing of family and her sister's kids tearing open presents, and the familiar weight of her own history around her. They texted throughout the day. Nothing significant. A photo she sent of her sister's 3-year-old wearing a gift bow on his head. A photo Nathan sent back of Lily asleep on the couch at 9 p.m., still wearing her Christmas pajamas. A message that said simply, "Merry Christmas." Nathan with no punctuation, because that was her. And his response, which was, "Merry Christmas." Victoria, and then, after a beat, "I miss you," which he sent before he'd fully decided to, and then sat looking at the screen with the particular vulnerability of someone who has sent a true thing and is now waiting. Her response came 3 minutes later. "I know. I miss you too. More than I expected to." He read it twice, put the phone face down on the coffee table, looked at the Christmas tree they'd decorated the week before. He and Lily and Victoria. Another messy and loud and imperfect undertaking that had ended with tinsel in Victoria's hair and Lily declaring the tree the best one we've ever had, with the finality of an art critic making a definitive assessment. He picked the phone back up and typed, "Drive safe tomorrow. Always do." "I know. Say it anyway." A pause. Then, "Drive safe tomorrow, Nathan." He smiled at his phone in the dark living room like a man in his 30s who was apparently becoming a person who smiled at text messages, and thought that this was either love or something close enough to love that the distinction had stopped mattering. January was when things got harder. Not between them. Between them, things were actually finding a firmer footing. January was when Meridian hit a rough patch that was the kind of rough that keeps a CEO up at 3 in the morning. A product launch that had been 18 months in development didn't perform the way the internal numbers had suggested it would. The press wasn't brutal. It was almost worse than brutal. It was politely disappointed, which is the tech journalism equivalent of a shrug. And Victoria had to spend 2 consecutive weeks doing damage control while simultaneously making decisions about what to do with the product line going forward, while managing the morale of 400 employees who could smell the uncertainty even when nobody was talking about it. Nathan watched this happen from the position of someone who was close enough to see it clearly and far enough not to be inside it. He learned things about Victoria that winter that 6 years of friendship hadn't shown him, because the specific pressure of a professional crisis reveals things that ordinary circumstances don't. He learned that she slept 4 hours some nights and didn't mention it until he noticed the shadows under her eyes. He learned that she had a tendency, under real stress, to go very quiet and internal in a way that looked like composure from the outside, and was actually a coping mechanism that worked for her up to a point and then stopped working abruptly. He learned the signs. He paid attention the way she'd always paid attention to him. One Tuesday evening, she came to his apartment after a board meeting that had apparently been the conversational equivalent of a root canal, and sat on his couch without taking her coat off and stared at the middle distance with an expression he'd never seen on her face before. Not sad exactly, more like someone who has been bracing for a long time and is very tired of bracing. Nathan sat down beside her. He didn't say anything, he just sat there. After a while, she said, "I don't know if I made the right call." "Which one?" "The product, the launch timing. I pushed for Q4 and the team was telling me we needed another quarter and She stopped. "I thought I was right. I was sure I was right. And I might have been wrong." Were you actually wrong, or did it just underperform expectations? She looked at him. Those can be the same thing. They can. They're also not always the same thing. He leaned back against the couch cushion. What do the numbers actually tell you? Not the press. The numbers. She was quiet for a moment, and he watched her shift gears, watched the specific transition that happened when she moved from the emotional processing of something into the analytical engagement with it. The numbers say it's underperforming in 2 segments and doing roughly what we projected in 3 others. So it's not a failure, it's a partial miss. A partial miss that cost 18 months and a significant portion of the budget. Right, which is a problem worth taking seriously. Is it a you were wrong problem or a we miscalculated 1 segment problem? She looked at him. He looked back. I hate that you ask good questions, she said. I've been told that before. By who? My therapist, mostly. The corner of her mouth moved, just slightly. We miscalculated a segment, she said. We had bad data on the enterprise market's readiness. Sales had been telling us one thing, and the actual buyers were doing something else. So the timing call wasn't wrong. The intel was wrong. It's still my responsibility. Yeah, he said. It is. Doesn't mean the decision itself was wrong. He paused. Victoria, you're going to make bad calls sometimes. You run a company of 400 people and you make hundreds of decisions, and some of them are going to miss. That's not a character flaw. That's the job. She was quiet for a long moment. The apartment was warm around them, Lily already asleep, the city outside doing its usual quiet Thursday night things. I know that, Victoria said. I know it up here. She touched her temple briefly. It takes longer to reach here. She pressed her palm flat against her sternum. Yeah, Nathan said. I know that feeling. She looked at him. She seemed to hear the weight in those 3 words, to understand that he wasn't drawing a casual comparison. He was speaking from a specific place, the place that had kept him running his 6-dinner rotation and his 6:15 mornings and his 1 hour of television before bed. The place that understood the distance between knowing something and feeling it. She reached out and took his hand. Not dramatically, just set her hand on top of his on the couch cushion and left it there. Thank you, she said, for this. I haven't done anything. You've been here. A pause. You have no idea how much that is. He turned his hand over and held hers. They sat like that for a while, not talking, just present in the warm apartment while the city moved outside the window. It was an ordinary thing. It was one of the least dramatic moments of their entire story. Nathan would remember it anyway, because it was one of the first times he fully understood that being with someone wasn't primarily about the heightened moments. It was about the Tuesday evenings when one of you was tired and the other one just sat there. February brought Lily's piano recital. She'd been preparing for it since November, working on a piece that her teacher described as ambitious for her level, which Lily had received as the highest possible compliment and had promptly practiced with an intensity that occasionally alarmed Nathan. He had listened to the opening 12 bars of that piece approximately 300 times by the night of the recital and could have played it himself, badly, from muscle memory alone. Victoria had cleared her calendar a week in advance. She didn't announce this to Nathan. He found out because Lily mentioned it, with the offhand casualness of someone who considers this kind of thing a given. Victoria moved a meeting, Lily said at breakfast, the morning of the recital. Nathan looked up from his coffee. What? She had something for work. She moved it. Lily was eating toast, unbothered. She texted me. She texted you? Lily held up her phone to show him. Victoria had texted his 8-year-old daughter at 7:30 that morning, front row. Nothing was going to make me miss it. You're going to be great. Nathan sat with this for a moment. Then he took a slow sip of coffee and looked out the kitchen window. Dad? Lily said. Yeah. She's good, said with the simple authority of a child who has made a final judgment. Like, actually good. I know, Nathan said. Then stop being scared. He looked at his daughter. She was eating her toast with the unselfconscious pragmatism of someone who has said the necessary thing and is now moving on with her morning. I'm not scared, he said. Lily gave him the look, the one with the brown eyes, her mother's eyes, patient and slightly exasperated. She said nothing. Nathan finished his coffee. The recital that evening was held in the community room of Lily's music school, a slightly too warm space with folding chairs and a good upright piano and the particular ambient energy of about 40 children in varying states of pre-performance anxiety. Nathan sat in the front row, as promised. Victoria arrived 6 minutes before it started and dropped into the seat beside him, slightly breathless, her coat not fully buttoned, the specific look of someone who had been in a car very recently and moved quickly. "Traffic," she said. "You made it." "Of course I made it." She settled herself, unbuttoning the coat fully, scanning the program. "Where is she on the list?" "Fourth." Victoria nodded. She found the listing, read it, put the program in her lap. Then she reached sideways and briefly squeezed Nathan's hand, once, firmly, before releasing it and looking toward the stage. He looked at her profile for a moment. The clean line of her, the attention she was already directing toward the stage with the focused quality she brought to everything, fully present, fully here. He looked back toward the stage too. Lily was fourth. She walked out with the serious, slightly rigid posture of a child who is concentrating too hard on not tripping, sat at the piano bench, adjusted it with the solemnity of a professional, and then looked up once at the audience. She found Nathan immediately. She always found him immediately, some instinct she'd had since she was small. And then her eyes moved one seat over and found Victoria. Victoria gave her a single small nod. Nothing theatrical, just, "I see you. You've got this." Something in Lily's posture changed, a small release of tension across her shoulders. She turned back to the piano and began to play. She played it beautifully, not flawlessly. There was a stumble in the eighth bar where she'd always stumbled and probably always would, and she paused for a half second that was barely perceptible before continuing, but beautifully in the real sense, the sense that means the music reached across the room and did something to the people sitting in it. Nathan, who had heard those 12 bars 300 times, still felt his chest tighten in the way it always did when Lily played with full commitment. It was one of the things she'd come to hold on her own, separate from him, and watching her in full possession of it was one of the specific pleasures of being her father. When Lily finished and the applause started, Nathan clapped hard enough that his palms hurt. Victoria beside him was clapping with the same intensity, and when Lily stood from the bench and gave her small, serious bow and then broke into a grin that took over her entire face, Nathan heard Victoria make a sound beside him. Not quite a word, more an exhale of pure warmth, and he looked at her and saw that her eyes were bright. She caught him looking. "Don't," she said. "I didn't say anything. You were about to." "I was just going to say, don't." But she was smiling. He looked back at the stage where Lily was returning to her seat, still grinning, and he thought, this is a family. Not the planned kind, not the kind that arrives in a single moment of decision, the kind that assembles itself from Saturday wreaths and leftover chicken and 300 repetition piano pieces in front row seats at recitals. The kind that is built from showing up. He didn't say it out loud. It wasn't the right moment, and he wasn't someone who said the important things impulsively. But he felt it, clearly and without doubt, for the first time in a long time. March came, and with it a moment that Nathan had not prepared for and that arrived with the particular force of things that catch you in an ordinary situation. It was a Sunday. He and Victoria were at his kitchen table doing the loose, companionable thing of being in the same space, doing separate tasks. She had her laptop open, working through something from Meridian that apparently couldn't wait until Monday. He was looking at apartment listings, because the idea of more space had been quietly growing in his mind for months. Lily was in her room. She'd been in her room for the better part of the afternoon, which wasn't unusual. She had stretches of self-contained quiet that Nathan had always respected. But when she came out around 3 o'clock, she was carrying something, a photograph, in the small frame that lived on her bedside table. She brought it to the kitchen and set it on the table between Nathan and Victoria without explanation. It was a photo of Claire, one of the good ones, taken at a friend's birthday a year or so before she died when she'd been laughing at something just outside the frame. She looked exactly like Lily looked when Lily laughed with full commitment. Victoria looked at the photo. Then she looked at Lily. "She's pretty," Lily said. She was matter-of-fact about it, not fragile. "I was looking at it, and I was thinking, she would have liked you." The kitchen went quiet. Not the uncomfortable kind. The kind where something true has been said and everyone in the room is giving it space. Victoria looked at the photo for a moment, Then she looked at Lily with an expression that was fully open in a way Nathan rarely saw on her. "I hope so," Victoria said, quietly, honestly. "She liked people who were straight with her," Lily said. "That's what Dad says, and you're straight with people." "I try to be." "She also liked people who were good to Dad." Lily looked at her with those two serious 8-year-old eyes. "You're good to him." Victoria glanced at Nathan for just a second, barely a glance, more an acknowledgement, and then looked back at Lily. "I try to be," she said again. "He makes it easy." "He can be annoying," Lily offered fairly. "He can," Victoria agreed. "Hey," Nathan said. "But he's good," Lily said. "So." She picked up the photo frame and looked at it one more time, then headed back toward her room with the purposeful air of someone who has said what they came to say. At the doorway she paused, turned back. "Victoria?" "Yeah?" "You should come to the spring recital too. I'm playing something harder." Then she was gone, back down the hallway, and the sound of her bedroom door clicking closed was the only sound in the apartment for a moment. Nathan looked at Victoria. She was looking at the doorway Lily had just walked through, her expression doing the thing it did. That brief, unguarded openness, there and then quietly put away. "She's remarkable," Victoria said, low, like she was mostly saying it to herself. "She is," Nathan said. Victoria looked at him. "She's yours," she said, "all the best parts. She has her mother's eyes. She has your stubbornness and your loyalty and your habit of saying exactly the necessary thing at exactly the right moment." A pause. "The eyes are Claire's, the rest is yours." Nathan looked at the table. He pressed his thumbnail against the edge of it, a small physical anchor. "Victoria." "I need to say something." She waited. She was good at that. "I've been careful," he said, "with all of this, with you. And I know that sometimes felt like I was holding back, and I was, partly, and that wasn't fair. Nathan, you don't have to." "Let me finish." He looked at her. "I've been careful because the last time I loved someone that completely, I lost her, and it broke something in me that took years to even partially put back together. And I know that's not your problem. I know it's not something you caused or something you should have to manage around. But it's true, and I wanted to say it out loud instead of just hoping you could feel it." Victoria was very still. "And the other true thing," he said, "is that what I feel about you is not what I feel about a friend. It hasn't been for a while. I don't know exactly when it changed, or maybe it didn't change so much as it became something I was willing to see." He stopped. He was starting to lose the thread. "What I'm trying to say is, I love you." He said it with none of the careful qualification of the previous sentences, just flat and plain, and there. Victoria looked at him for a long moment. He watched her face move through something. Not surprise exactly, but the emotion of a thing you've waited for finally arriving. A thing that doesn't stop being significant just because you believed it was coming. "I know," she said. A pause. Her voice was quieter than usual. "I think I've known for a little while. I was waiting for you to catch up. I'm a little slow." "You're not slow. You're thorough." The corner of her mouth moved. "There's a difference." He reached across the table and took her hand. She looked down at their hands together on the table and then back at him, and in her expression was everything she'd carried quietly for 2.5 years. The patience and the love and the cost of it, and the particular profound relief of not having to carry it alone anymore. "I love you," she said, simply, like it had always been true, because it had. He held her hand at the kitchen table in the Sunday afternoon quiet. Lily, in her room, probably already thinking about the harder piece for the spring recital, the wreath they'd made still hanging on the front door, the apartment that had slowly stopped being just a place to be safe in and started being a place he actually wanted to come home to. He did not have a ring. He had not yet had the particular thought that was quietly beginning to form in the back of his mind. He was just here, present, not looking very far ahead, which was new for him and felt like its own kind of progress. But that evening, after Victoria had gone home and Lily was asleep, and the apartment was quiet again, Nathan sat on the couch in the dark with the television off, an unusual choice, a deliberate one, and let himself sit with what the day had contained. His daughter placing Claire's photo on the table, Victoria looking at it with full respect and no performance. Lily saying she would have liked you with the casual certainty of a child who trusts her own judgment. 3 words on a kitchen table that had cost him longer to say than they should have, and that Victoria had received like she'd known they were coming and was glad they'd finally arrived. He thought about systems, about the structure he'd built to stay functional and upright and safe. He thought about all the ways this woman had moved quietly through the edges of that structure without threatening it, patient and present, not asking him to dismantle anything, just being there until the walls stopped being walls and became something more like open windows. He thought about how some things, the real things, don't arrive in a moment of sudden clarity. They arrive in chicken dinners and lopsided wreaths and 300 repetition piano pieces, in Tuesday evenings on the couch, in Sunday afternoons with a photograph. He sat in the dark for a long time, thinking about this. Then he went to bed, and for the first night in recent memory, there was no low current of anxiety, no old fear running underneath, just the quiet, solid, ordinary weight of a life that was, somehow, against his better attempts to prevent it, becoming full again. The thought arrived the way the important ones usually did, not in a dramatic flash, not in a manufactured moment of clarity, but quietly, sideways, while Nathan was doing something completely unrelated. It was a Tuesday in April. He was on his lunch break, eating a sandwich at his desk and reading something on his phone with the low-level distraction of a man whose mind was never fully in one place. His office was open plan and loud in the middle of the day. Keyboards, phone calls, the particular ambient noise of 30 people working in close proximity, and he'd long since learned to tune most of it out. He wasn't thinking about Victoria specifically. He was thinking about the weekend logistics, about Lily's spring recital coming up in 3 weeks, about whether the apartment hunting he'd been doing in a vague, non-committal way was something he should start taking seriously. He was thinking about all the small, practical pieces of his life and how they'd begun to arrange themselves differently lately, with a slightly altered center of gravity. And then in the middle of all of that ordinary thinking, the thought arrived, I want to marry her. Not as a question, not as a hypothetical or a maybe or a someday possibility to be filed and examined later, just a clean, unqualified fact. He sat with his sandwich in his hand and felt it settle into him like something that had always been true and had simply been waiting for him to notice. He put the sandwich down. He sat very still for a moment in his loud, open-plan office and took stock of what had just happened in his own mind. He waited for the familiar anxiety to follow, the old fear that always came when something mattered enough to lose. It came, but softer than he expected. A background note rather than the defining chord. Because the truth was, somewhere between the kitchen table in March and everything that had come before and after it, he had quietly stopped asking himself whether he was ready. Not because the fear disappeared, but because the wanting had grown large enough that the fear was no longer running the calculation. He picked his sandwich back up, ate it, thought about it for the rest of the afternoon with the focused, methodical attention he brought to things he'd actually decided. He didn't tell Victoria. He didn't tell Marcus, which cost him something, because Marcus was the person he processed decisions with, and not being able to say anything felt like pressure building behind a wall. He didn't tell anyone. He just carried it, quietly, while he worked through what it meant and how, and crucially, where. The where came to him on a Wednesday night, a week later, while he was making dinner and not quite listening to the podcast he'd put on. He was chopping onions, one of the original 6 meals, pasta with a red sauce, a Wednesday standard, and the fire pit weekend drifted into his mind the way it still sometimes did. The cold air, and the wine, and the laughter. The specific silence that fell after Victoria's 4 words, the drive home, 45 minutes of not saying things. He set the knife down. The place where it started. That was where it had to end, or not end, become something else. Complete a circle. He didn't have a precise word for it, only the bone-deep certainty that it was right. The ring was the next thing. He'd never bought a ring before. Claire's engagement ring had been her grandmother's, passed down, a thing that already existed and was simply placed on her hand, and Nathan had been 27 and grateful not to have to navigate jewelry stores alone. He was 32 now, and had no such luck. He went on a Saturday afternoon while Lily was at a friend's birthday party, which gave him approximately 3 hours. He drove to a small jewelry district he'd looked up the night before. Not a mall, not a chain, and walked into the third store on the block because the first two felt wrong in ways he couldn't articulate, and the third one had a quiet that felt like the right kind of serious. The woman behind the counter was in her 60s, with the particular unhurried patience of someone who had been doing her job long enough to understand that people buying engagement rings were in a specific kind of emotional state and needed room rather than sales pressure. Looking for an engagement ring, Nathan said, which was obviously true and also the only thing he had prepared to say. Any sense of what she likes? The woman asked. No fanfare, no congratulations performance, just the practical first question. Simple, Nathan said, thinking about it. Not flashy. She doesn't wear a lot of jewelry generally. When she does, it's usually something small and real looking, not statement pieces. Classic, but not minimal? Yeah, exactly that. The woman nodded and brought out a tray. Nathan stood and looked at rings for 20 minutes, picking some up, putting them back, eliminating the ones that were either too ornate or too plain. He kept coming back to one. White gold band, slightly textured, a single round diamond that was not enormous, not a rock, not something that announced itself, but set in a way that made it feel important rather than decorative. It looked like something Victoria would actually wear. It looked like her. That one, he said. Good eye, the woman said, in a tone that suggested she genuinely meant it and was not simply completing a transaction. He paid for it. It was more than he'd planned to spend and less than he'd feared. He drove home with the small bag on the passenger seat and kept checking it at red lights the way you check something you're afraid of losing. He put the ring in the back of his sock drawer when he got home. The classic hiding location, obvious to anyone who looked, but Lily was not in the habit of going through his drawers, and Victoria had no reason to, so it would hold. Lily was still at the party. He stood in the quiet apartment, alone, and looked at nothing for a while. He thought about Claire. He did this without flinching now, mostly. He thought about what she would have made of all of this. And he found, as he sometimes did in the better moments, that the thought was more warmth than ache. Claire had been someone who loved with intention. She'd chosen him with her whole chest, without hedging, and she'd have understood why it took him as long as it did to find his way back to being someone capable of choosing the same way. She'd have liked Victoria. He was certain of that in the same way Lily was certain of it, with the gut-level knowledge of someone who had known Claire well and knew what she recognized in people. He sat down on the couch. He thought about the fire pit. He thought about sitting in his parked car for 11 minutes, counting the clock. He thought about how much of his life he'd spent inside his own careful system, orbiting the warmth of other people's lives without letting himself be in one fully. He thought, not anymore. The logistics took 2 more weeks to arrange. The rental house, the same one Marcus had found the first time, was available in mid-May, a Saturday. Nathan called the owner directly and booked it for just the 2 of them, which required a conversation with the owner who wanted to know if there was a specific occasion. And Nathan said yes, there was, and left it at that. He told Lily on a Thursday night. She was at the kitchen table doing homework, fractions, her ongoing nemesis, when he sat down across from her and said, I need to tell you something. She looked up immediately. Kids always knew when a tone means something. I'm going to ask Victoria to marry me, he said. He said it plainly because Lily respected plainness. I wanted you to know before I did it. Lily looked at him. She held her pencil loosely in her hand, and he could see her processing, the way she did, carefully, at her own pace, without performing a reaction. Are you asking my permission? She said. No, Nathan said. You're 8. It's not your decision to make. He paused. But it's your life too, and I wanted you to know. She looked at the table, then back at him. Does Victoria know? Not yet. Is she going to say yes? I think so. You think so? A beat. Dad, I'm fairly confident. Lily put her pencil down on the worksheet. She folded her hands on the table with the composed posture of someone twice her age. She loves you, she said. She's been in love with you for a long time. She told me once. Nathan stared at her. She told you? Not in like a weird way. We were talking about something and she said, Lily searched her memory. She said sometimes the right thing takes a long time to arrive and you have to be patient with it. She shrugged one shoulder. I knew what she meant. I'm not dumb. I know you're not dumb.
And then she said she'd been patient with something for a while and it was worth it. Another shrug. So,
Nathan sat with this for a moment. Victoria, who managed what she showed people, who had the quality of composure that looked like distance from the outside, Victoria had said that to his 8-year-old daughter, had let Lily see that much. "What do you think?" he said. "About all of it, honestly." Lily picked her pencil back up and looked at the fraction worksheet. "I think she already feels like part of our family," she said. "She's just not official yet." A pause. "Make her official, Dad." Nathan sat at the kitchen table for a moment after that. He thought about the distance he'd traveled in 8 months. From a man who couldn't finish a text message to a man sitting across from his daughter talking about rings and asking for honest input. "Okay," he said. "Okay," Lily said, and went back to the fractions. He drove to Marcus's apartment that weekend. He'd been carrying the secret for nearly 3 weeks, and he needed to tell someone who wasn't 8, and Marcus was Marcus. He would be exuberant and obnoxious about it for approximately 5 minutes, and then give Nathan something real. He was right about the 5 minutes. Marcus, upon hearing the news, made a sound that Nathan could only describe as victory adjacent, and Priya, who was in the kitchen, said, "I knew it," at a volume that made the neighbor's dog bark. Then Marcus sat down and said, "You're sure?" "Yeah," Nathan said. "Like actually sure. Not in your head talking yourself into it sure." "Marcus, I'm asking because I love you and this matters." Nathan looked at him. "I'm sure," he said. "I've been sure since April. I've been carrying a ring in my sock drawer for 3 weeks. I booked the house." He paused. "I'm sure." Marcus looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded, once, with a seriousness that Nathan appreciated because it was Marcus taking something seriously, which was not always a given. "Good," Marcus said, "because I've watched that woman love you for 2 years from a distance and have a normal face about it, and that kind of patience deserves a yes." 2.5 years, Nathan said. "What?" She said 2.5 years. She had the number ready. Marcus was quiet for a beat. "Man," he said softly. "Yeah." Priya came out of the kitchen with 3 glasses of wine. She set them down, sat on the arm of the sofa, looked at Nathan. "Is the wreath still on your door?" He thought about it. "It dried out in February. I left it up until March." He paused. "She doesn't know I left it up until March." Priya and Marcus exchanged a look. Then Priya said, "You need to tell her that story at some point. It's a good story." "One thing at a time," Nathan said. He went home that evening with the ring still in his sock drawer and 12 days still between him and the weekend in May. He passed Lily's room on the way to bed. She was asleep, one arm thrown out from under the blanket, her face loose and young in the way sleeping children always look. He stood in the doorway for a moment. He thought about how much of his energy for 4 years had gone into being careful. Careful with his own heart, careful with hers, careful with the structure of their days. It had been necessary. He didn't regret it. But there was a difference between careful and sealed off, and somewhere along the way he'd let the two collapse into each other, and it had taken a woman with 2.5 years of patient, undemanding love to show him the distance between them. He was going to ask her to marry him. He was going to do it at the fire pit, under the cold night sky, at the exact place where a joke became something true. He was going to do it, and she was going to say yes, and then they were going to figure out the rest of it together. Imperfectly, and with occasional disagreement about furniture and dinner, and who should have noticed the thing that needed to be noticed. He was looking forward to all of it. The drive to the rental house on the Saturday in May took 93 minutes because there was traffic on the interstate that he hadn't planned for. Victoria was in the passenger seat, aware that they were going somewhere, but not where. Nathan had said only that it was a day trip and to dress for being outside, which she had accepted with the particular quality of trust that still moved him slightly when he noticed it. She'd asked once, in the first 20 minutes of driving, where they were going, and he'd said, "You'll see," without further elaboration. And she'd looked at him for a moment, and then looked back out the window and let it go. She had her elbow on the window ledge and her chin in her hand, watching the landscape. He'd seen her in this exact posture before. In another car, coming home from a different weekend, in the 45 minutes after the fire pit when everything was different, and neither of them was talking about it. He drove. The radio was off. The silence between them was the comfortable kind, the kind they'd built over 8 months of real time together. But underneath it, Nathan was aware of his own heartbeat in a way he normally wasn't. The ring was in the inside pocket of his jacket. He'd moved it from the sock drawer that morning, and it had been in his jacket all day, present at the edge of his consciousness like a held breath. "Nathan," Victoria said, about 40 minutes out. "Yeah, we're heading toward the mountains." "Are we?" "We're heading toward where we went last October." She said it with the same calm she brought to everything, but there was something in her voice, a recognition. Nathan said. Silence. Another mile of highway. "Are you taking me back to the house?" she said. Not a question exactly, more like putting a fact down on the table between them. "Yeah," he said. She was quiet. He kept his eyes on the road. He could feel her looking at him in his peripheral vision, that direct, assessing look she had. "Okay," she said, soft. He glanced at her. She was looking forward now, out the windshield at the road ahead, and there was something in her expression he couldn't fully read. Complex and careful, something she was holding close. But her hands, which had been loose in her lap, were now folded together. And he thought that maybe she knew, or was beginning to, and that it was okay. That was fine. Let her know something was coming. It didn't diminish anything. They arrived in the late afternoon, the house golden in the May light, in a way it hadn't been in October's gray. He pulled into the driveway and turned the engine off. They sat for a moment. "The same house," Victoria said. "Yeah. You booked it specifically." "I did." She looked at the house, then at him. He met her eyes, and something passed between them in the easy, shorthand way that things moved between them now. A whole conversation compressed into a few seconds of looking at each other. "Come on," he said. They got out of the car. The property looked different in the May afternoon. The yard fuller, the trees with their leaves back, the fire pit sitting cold and unused in the middle of the yard where it had been last October. The same pit, the same rough stone ring, the chairs still arranged around it in approximately the same configuration because nobody had moved them since fall. Victoria walked to it slowly. Nathan walked beside her. She stood at the edge of it and looked at the cold ash in the center, the chairs around the edges, the yard beyond. "Last time I was here," she said, "there were 6 of us, and you said something you didn't mean." "I said something I wasn't ready to mean," he said. "There's a difference." She turned to look at him. There it was, that full direct attention. No management, no composure deployed for self-protection. Just her, open and present, waiting. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. Victoria's eyes dropped to his hand. Something moved across her face, quick, involuntary, everything she normally kept ordered coming briefly loose at once. "Nathan," she started. He went down on one knee. The ground was slightly uneven, and it was less graceful than the movies made it look, which felt right. He got his knee on the ground, pulled the ring from its box, looked up at her. She had her hand over her mouth. Her eyes were full in a way he'd never seen them. Victoria Hayes, who had sat in her own boardroom during a crisis and been steady, who had managed her own grief and her own love for 2.5 years with composure. She was standing in front of a cold fire pit, with her hand over her mouth and tears running freely down her face, making no effort to stop them, or control them, or manage how it looked. "I said it once as a joke," Nathan said. His voice came out slightly unsteady, which he wasn't going to apologize for. "And I spent about 8 months understanding what it actually meant." He paused. "I know what it means now. I want you, all of it. The company problems you bring to my couch on Tuesday nights. The opinion you have about every menu I cook. The way you pay attention to Lily in a way that she knows is real. The person you are when you're not managing how you look to people." He paused again. "I want the whole thing. I want every year of it." Victoria was crying without making much sound, just tears running freely, her hand still loosely over her mouth, her eyes locked on his. "So," he said, "for real this time, will you marry me?" She made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and something else, something that had no clean name. She reached out and grabbed his arm, not gently, with the grip of someone who needed an anchor, and pulled him to his feet at the same time as she said yes, in a voice that was wrecked in the best possible way. "Yes, Nathan. Obviously, yes." He stood,
and she stepped into him and he put his arms around her, and she pressed her face against his shoulder and he felt her breathe. 2 or 3 shaky, releasing breaths, like someone putting down something very heavy. And he held on. He held her at a cold fire pit in a backyard in May, and the ring was still in his hand, and he realized after a moment that he hadn't actually gotten to put it on her finger yet. "Hey," he said, against her hair. "What? I still need to—" He held up the ring between them. She pulled back just enough to look at it. Then she laughed. The real laugh, full and completely uncontrolled, the one that took over her face. "Right," she said. "Sorry. Don't apologize." She held out her left hand. It was not entirely steady. He slid the ring on. It fit. He'd measured with a ring she'd left on his bathroom counter once, which had involved a piece of string and a ruler and a jeweler confirming the measurement with the careful neutrality of a professional who sees this all the time. Victoria looked at the ring on her hand for a moment. Then she looked at him. Her eyes were still wet, and her expression was open in a way he was finally, fully beginning to understand was the version of her that existed underneath everything else. The version not many people got to see. "I really thought you'd never ask again," she said. He laughed. He couldn't help it. "That's almost the exact thing you said last time." "It's still true." She reached up and put her palm against the side of his face, and he leaned into it slightly. "Nathan?" "Yeah?" "Thank you for being slow." She said it without irony. "I think you needed to arrive here yourself. I wouldn't have wanted it any other way." He turned his head and pressed a brief kiss to her palm. She let her hand stay there for a moment. They stood at the fire pit for a long time after that, not talking much. There was a version of silence between them now that was so comfortable it had become its own kind of language. The yard was quiet around them, birds somewhere in the trees, the late afternoon light going gold and then slowly amber as the hours moved. At some point, Victoria sat down in one of the old chairs around the fire pit, and Nathan sat in the one beside her, and she leaned her head on his shoulder, and he watched the light change across the yard. "I called Marcus," he said, eventually. Victoria made a sound. "How long did it take him to stop making noise?" 5 minutes, roughly. And then he actually said something useful. "He did. He always does." A pause. "He's been a good friend to you." "Yeah." Another pause. "He said that watching you love me from a distance for 2 years with a normal face was 2.5 years, Victoria said. 2.5 years, Nathan corrected with a slight smile at the tree line. "What did he say about it?" "He said that kind of patience deserves a yes." Victoria was quiet for a moment. "He's not wrong." Then, 2.5 years sounds like a long time. "Was it?" She thought about it. "Some of it," she said honestly. "Some of it just felt like being near you, which was enough. Mostly a beat. There were hard nights. I'm sorry for the hard nights. You didn't know." "I know, I'm still sorry." She turned her head slightly and pressed her lips briefly against his shoulder. Not quite a kiss, just a resting of warmth there. "You're making up for them," she said. He looked at the ring on her finger, catching the fading light. Simple. White gold, slightly textured, exactly like her. He thought about Lily at home with Marcus and Priya tonight, who had agreed to take her for the evening with a level of eager enthusiasm that had been barely contained. He thought about calling her after dinner, which he'd promised, and how she would want every detail, and how he was not quite sure yet whether she'd greet the news with tears or a very Lily-like finally, and then go back to whatever she was doing. He thought about all the ordinary days ahead, the apartment they'd have to figure out, his or hers or something new, a conversation with 17 opinions between them. Lily's adjustment, which he didn't think would be difficult, but which he was not going to assume. Victoria's schedule and his schedule, and the constant negotiation of 2 busy lives deciding to share their logistics. The things they'd disagree about, that they hadn't disagreed about yet, the corners of each other they hadn't seen under pressure. He thought about all of it with clear eyes. No romantic blindness, no suppression of the complicated parts. Just the honest recognition that this was a real thing they were choosing, with real weight and real cost and real possibility. He thought about a woman who had sat beside him for 6 years in that particular middle distance, carrying something quietly,
and who had waited until a joke became an opening, and an opening became a conversation, and a conversation became 8 months of showing each other who they actually were. He thought, I did not deserve this patience. And then, almost immediately, I'm going to spend a long time making sure she doesn't regret it. The sky was going pink above the tree line now. Victoria had gone still beside him with the comfortable stillness of someone completely at rest. Hey, Nathan said softly. Are you asleep? No. A pause. Almost. We should find somewhere to eat. In a minute. He let her have the minute. He looked at the cold fire pit. No fire in it tonight, no group of friends around it, no late October chill or wine or the particular loose energy of people away from their lives for a weekend. Just 2 people in May chairs at the end of an afternoon that had changed the direction of things. Last October, something had begun here. A joke that was also, underneath it, a truth he hadn't known how to say. 4 words she hadn't laughed at. A silence that fell over a backyard and didn't entirely lift until a 90-minute drive and a waterfront and an Italian restaurant and a bookstore and 100 ordinary evenings had done their slow, patient work. Nathan Reed looked at the empty fire pit and the pink sky above the trees and the woman beside him, who was nearly asleep in a lawn chair wearing his ring, and felt the specific, quiet, almost unremarkable feeling of being exactly where he was supposed to be. Not a lightning strike, not a dramatic climax, just this, a yard in May, a cold fire pit, the late light, and the weight of a life that had finally, stubbornly, against his own best efforts to keep it manageable, become full. They called Lily from the car, parked outside a small Italian restaurant 40 minutes from the rental house. Different from the one in Capitol Hill, smaller, with handwritten specials on a chalkboard visible through the window. The kind of place that existed in small towns near mountains and didn't need to try very hard because the food was simply good. Victoria had fixed her face in the sun visor mirror, which she would have denied needing to do if asked, and Nathan had straightened in the driver's seat with the particular posture of a man who was about to have a conversation he was looking forward to. Lily picked up on the second ring. Did she say yes? No preamble, no hello. Hi, Lily, Nathan said. Dad, did she say yes? Victoria leaned toward the phone. She said yes, Lily. A pause. Then a sound that Nathan could not have described precisely. Something between a laugh and a cry, and a very controlled version of both. Because Lily was his daughter and didn't perform emotion freely, but this was apparently the thing that got through. Okay, Lily said. Her voice was slightly thick. Okay, good. Are you crying? Nathan asked. No. A beat. A little. Stop it. I'm not doing anything. You're listening? A pause. Is she... Can I talk to her? Nathan handed the phone to Victoria without a word. Hey, Victoria said. Hi. Lily's voice was quieter now, the way it got when she was saying something she meant. Welcome to the family, officially. Victoria pressed her lips together briefly. Nathan watched her do it, the small, visible effort of keeping herself together. Thank you, Lily. That means a lot. I told Dad to ask you like 2 months ago, Lily said, with the dry timing of a child who has been patient and is now mentioning it. I know, he told me. He takes a while. He does, but he gets there. Yeah. A pause. Will you still come to the spring recital? It's in 2 weeks. I'm playing the harder piece. I already cleared my calendar, Victoria said. A brief silence on the line. The good kind. Okay, Lily said. I'm going to go now because Priya is making me watch a movie with them, and it's the one I wanted to watch, and if I miss the beginning, I'll be annoyed. Go watch your movie. Tell Dad I love him. Tell him yourself. He's right there, and it's embarrassing. Nathan, who had heard everything, said, I love you too, Lily. Gross, Lily said and hung up. Victoria looked at the phone for a moment, then at Nathan, and then she laughed. The full one, the real one. The laugh that took over her face and erased all the careful management she normally maintained. He laughed too, and for a moment they sat in a parked car outside a mountain town Italian restaurant with the May evening going dark around them, laughing the way people laugh when they are genuinely simply happy, which is different from all other kinds of laughing and doesn't happen as often as it should. They went inside and ate dinner. It was a good dinner, not remarkable, not the kind of meal that gets remembered in precise sensory detail for years. Just good food at a small table with a candle burning between them and no particular agenda, the way dinners can be when two people have just resolved something large and can now sit in the space it leaves behind. They talked about practical things. Not immediately. First, they just sat with each other in the easy, warm silence of the aftermath of something significant. But eventually, because they were both people who lived in the real world and not in moments of emotional suspension, the conversation found its way to the actual questions. "My apartment or yours?" Victoria said, turning her wine glass. "Or neither," Nathan said. "New place, fresh start." She looked at him with something he recognized as pleased surprise. She'd expected to have to suggest this. "You've been thinking about this." "Since April, on and off." Lily would need her own space, real space, not a corner. "Yeah, 2 bedrooms at minimum, probably 3. Seattle prices for 3 bedrooms are, I know." "I have more money than you," she said. Not unkindly, just directly, because she was direct. "That's not a conversation I want to be weird. I want us to figure it out openly." Nathan looked at her across the table. He'd thought about this too. There were men who would have found it complicated. Pride and money, and the particular way those things got knotted together in relationships. He'd done his own quiet accounting and decided it was not going to be complicated, because the alternative was letting it become a wall. And he was done building walls. "Not weird," he said. "We'll figure it out equitably, and we'll probably disagree about what equitable means, and we'll work it out." "Good." She nodded once. "Good." "Victoria." "Yeah. I know how to argue with you now. I'm not scared of the hard conversations." She looked at him with the expression she had when something landed right, a slight softening, a recognition. "Neither am I," she said. They stayed in a small inn nearby that night rather than driving back. Nathan had booked it in advance, another thing he'd planned, which Victoria discovered when he produced the reservation details. And she said, "You thought of everything." And he said, "I had 3 weeks to plan. I had to do something with the anxiety." She laughed. He was getting better at making her laugh. He'd started to understand which version of himself was funny to her. Not the performed humor of someone trying to land a joke, but the dry, self-aware version that admitted to the anxiety and the overthinking and the sock drawer and the 11 minutes in a parked car. The real version. The one he'd spent years only half showing people. She saw it completely. He was still getting used to that. The experience of being seen without remainder, with all the imperfect and unresolved parts included. It was, he'd decided, the most demanding and most worth it thing about loving someone who paid genuine attention. They drove back to Seattle the next morning under a clear May sky. This time there was no weighted silence in the car. Victoria had her elbow on the window ledge in the same old posture, but her left hand was in her lap and the ring was on it, and occasionally the light caught it, and Nathan noticed her look at it with an expression she wasn't directing at him, just a private moment between her and something she'd been waiting a long time for. He didn't say anything about it, he just drove. The engagement period was, like everything else between them, neither perfectly romantic nor unnecessarily dramatic. It was just real. They found an apartment in early July, a 3-bedroom in a neighborhood that was equidistant between Nathan's office and Meridian's headquarters, which had required a spreadsheet that Victoria built, and Nathan found both extremely useful and faintly alarming. It had floors made of wide, pale wood and a small balcony off the main room that looked over the street, and a kitchen large enough that 2 people could cook in it without constant collision, which they both considered non-negotiable. Moving was chaotic. Nathan owned furniture that Victoria declared unacceptable with the diplomatic honesty of someone who has strong opinions and decided not to hide them anymore. Victoria owned things that Nathan found baffling. A side table that appeared to serve no function, artwork that he admitted was good but couldn't have explained why. They argued about the couch, which was the first real argument of their domestic life together, and lasted approximately 4 days, during which they were both slightly cold and overly polite with each other, in the way that adults are when they're fighting about a couch, but also not entirely just fighting about a couch. "This isn't about the couch," Victoria said, on the 3rd evening when they were standing in the near-empty new apartment eating takeout containers because their respective old apartments were being packed,
and they'd forgotten to account for the liminal state of having nowhere fully functional. Nathan looked at her. "No," he admitted. "It's not entirely about the couch." "What's it about?"
He put his takeout container on the windowsill. He stood there for a moment. "I think it's about the merging of the things we each built when we were just our own people." He paused. "Your side table with no purpose." "It has a purpose." "What purpose?" She stopped. "It's from my apartment. The first one I had on my own after grad school. I bought it with my first real paycheck." A pause. "It holds my keys and sometimes a book." Nathan looked at her. She was looking at the container in her hands, not at him. "Okay," he said. "The side table stays." She looked up. "I don't need your permission for the side table." "I know. I'm saying I was wrong about it." He held her eyes. "Tell me the things that matter to you. I'll tell you the things that matter to me. We'll figure out the rest." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "The couch matters to me." "Because?" "Because I spend a significant part of my life on couches, processing difficult things, and the structural integrity of the seating affects the quality of the processing." He stared at her. "That is the most Victoria sentence you've ever said." "I'm aware." "We'll get your couch." "The sectional?" "The sectional, yes." She narrowed her eyes slightly. "You said the sectional was too large." "It is too large. We're getting it anyway." The sectional, when it arrived, was indeed too large for the living room and required 15 minutes of furniture repositioning before it fit in a way that worked. But once it was there, Nathan sat down on it and immediately understood what she'd meant about structural integrity. It was an extremely good couch. He told her this. She said, "I know," with the satisfied composure of a woman who had been right about the couch the entire time. Lily moved in on a Saturday in August, surrounded by the kind of controlled chaos that only an 8-year-old with strong opinions about the arrangement of her own belongings can generate. She had claimed the bedroom at the end of the hall with the window seat, which she'd decided was her room within 30 seconds of seeing it, and had communicated this decision with a quiet definitiveness that neither adult felt inclined to challenge. Nathan carried boxes. Victoria assembled furniture. She was, it turned out, significantly better at following assembly instructions than Nathan, who had a tendency to skip steps and then have to go back, which Victoria observed without comment the first time, and with precisely calibrated commentary every subsequent time. "The instructions say step 4 before step 5, she said. "I know what step 4 says. And yet, I'm doing it a different way." "How is that going?" "It's going fine." Lily from the doorway watching. "Dad always does it wrong and then fixes it." "That's not," Nathan started. "It's his process," Victoria told Lily. "We let him have it." Lily considered this. "Okay," she said, and went back to her room. By evening, the apartment had the particular exhausted warmth of a space that has been moved into rather than merely occupied. Takeout boxes again. Tie this time, spread across the new kitchen table. Lily in her pajamas, despite it being 7:30, cross-legged on the sectional with her book. Reading with the focused contentment of a person who has decided she likes where she is. Nathan looked at the room. At Victoria beside him on the couch, one knee pulled up, reviewing something on her phone. Work. Always work. But she'd learned to hold work more lightly around people who needed her present, and she put the phone down after a few minutes without him saying anything. At Lily, turning a page without looking up, he thought about his system. The 6:15 mornings and the 6 dinner rotation and the 1 hour of television before bed. The careful architecture of a life built to stay upright. He thought about how much of that structure had been necessary and how much of it had been, quietly, a kind of hiding. And he thought about what it meant that he'd arrived here, this living room, this couch, these 2 people, without dismantling himself to do it. He'd just slowly let the walls become windows, the way Victoria had known they would if he was given enough time and the right kind of patience. He reached over and took her hand. She looked up from where she'd been looking at nothing, at him, and squeezed his hand once. "Hi," she said. "Hi. We live here now." "We do." She looked around the room, at the side table by the hallway, her keys on it, at the sectional that was too large and perfect, at Lily on the far cushion,
completely absorbed in her book. "It's good," she said. "It is," he said. They were married the following April, the second Saturday of the month, which they'd chosen because the first Saturday had conflicted with a board meeting Victoria couldn't miss, and the third was too close to Lily's spring recital, and they'd collectively decided these were reasonable factors to consider when picking a wedding date, which told you everything you needed to know about the particular shape of their life. The ceremony was small, not because either of them had especially wanted small, but because when they'd started writing a guest list and found it manageable, they'd both felt a distinct relief that made the decision easy. 43 people. The restaurant they booked had a private room with tall windows, an exposed brick, and no particular pretension to it. Marcus was Nathan's best man, which was never going to be anything other than what it was. Priya was Victoria's, which had made Victoria emotional in the quiet, contained way she had of being emotional, briefly and then immediately moving on. Lily stood beside Nathan. She'd had opinions about her dress, which she had communicated in detail and which Victoria had taken seriously and navigated with the specific diplomacy of someone who understood that Lily's participation mattered more than any particular sartorial choice. The dress they'd landed on was pale blue, which Lily had declared acceptable, and then, privately, told Nathan she loved but wasn't going to say out loud because then it would seem like she'd been too easy. "You can love the dress, Lily," Nathan had told her. "I know," she'd said. "I'm just saying I could have loved a different one, too." That's a very diplomatic position. I learned from Victoria. On the morning of the wedding, Nathan stood in the small room the restaurant had given him to get ready in, a storage room, essentially, with a mirror propped against shelving units of tablecloths and spare chairs, wearing his suit and looking at himself with the particular blankness of a man who has arrived at a large moment and is not quite sure what to do with it. Marcus was there. He was doing the thing Marcus always did at important occasions, managing a subtle version of his own emotion by being busy, checking things, asking unnecessary questions about ties and timing. "You good?" Marcus said for the third time. "Yeah," Nathan said. "You look like you're doing math." "I'm not doing math." "You've got the math face." "I'm just—" He stopped, looked at himself in the mirror. "I keep thinking about the first year after Claire, you remember?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. He sat down on a folding chair behind Nathan, and when he spoke, his voice was different than usual, lower, without the performance. "I remember. I was pretty sure I was just going to be that, the guy who survived something and managed, forever." "Yeah, I know." "And now?" Nathan gestured vaguely at the mirror, at the suit, at the whole improbable morning. This, Marcus agreed. Nathan turned around and looked at him. "Thank you for all the weekends, for not pushing, but also for not disappearing." Marcus looked at him with the slightly uncomfortable directness of a man receiving something sincere. "You'd have done the same." "I know, but still." Marcus stood up. He straightened his own jacket, cleared his throat. "Victoria's good for you," he said. "She was always good for you. You just had to do the whole thing." He waved a hand at Nathan's general existence. "The whole thing," Nathan said. "The whole arrival at yourself." Marcus pressed his lips together briefly. "Claire would have liked this," he said quietly. Nathan held that. He didn't respond immediately. He just let it sit there in the storage room with the tablecloths and the folding chairs and the afternoon light coming through a high, small window. "Yeah," he said. "She would have." He walked down the short hallway to the private room with Marcus behind him and 43 people in folding chairs turning to watch, and Lily at the front standing in her pale blue dress with the careful posture of a child taking a role seriously, and the late April light coming through the tall windows in the particular way that April light has when the season has fully committed to itself. He stood at the front and waited. When Victoria appeared at the entrance to the room, Nathan registered her in stages, the way you register something your brain is trying to slow down to keep. She was in a simple dress, cream, no embellishment, exactly like her. Her hair was down. She wore small earrings that he recognized as her mother's, which she'd told him about one evening in late winter, showing them to him in a small velvet box with the care of someone handling something irreplaceable. She was looking at him across the room with that look. The direct, unguarded, fully present look that had started all of this, the one that didn't manage or perform or hold anything back. She walked toward him and he watched every step of it. When she reached him, she looked up at him. He looked down at her. "Hi," he said, very quietly. "Hi," she said. "You look—" He stopped because the word he wanted wasn't beautiful, though she was. The word was like you. She looked exactly like herself, which was the thing he'd loved about her before he knew he was loving it, the constancy of her being precisely who she was in every room she entered. "Don't," she said softly. "You'll make me cry and I will not forgive you. Victoria." "I mean it." "Okay," he said. His voice wasn't entirely steady. "Okay," the officiant began. The words were the traditional ones, mostly. They'd both agreed on tradition with small personal additions, which reflected the way they'd built most things together. Nathan had written 2 sentences he'd added to his vows, which he'd shown no one, and was fairly sure Marcus had tried twice to read off his notepad, and failed. When it was his turn, he said the traditional part clearly, and without stumbling, and then he said the 2 sentences. "I want to choose you for the rest of my life. Not because you waited for me, though you did, and I'll never take that for granted, but because every day I learn something about who you are, and every day I want more of it." Victoria's jaw tightened in the specific way it did when she was holding something together. She blinked once, hard. When it was her turn, she said the traditional part, and then she said, "You taught me something I didn't know I needed to learn. That being loved well, not perfectly, but honestly, and with someone's whole attention, is worth every year of waiting for it to be ready." The room was quiet. Nathan heard Lily, 3 feet away, make a sound she would later categorize as just breathing weird. They were married. He kissed her and she kissed him back, and the room made the sound rooms make. And Marcus did something enthusiastic with his hands, and Lily stood in her pale blue dress with her serious brown eyes gone bright. The reception was dinner and dancing and speeches. Marcus's speech was funny for 4 minutes and then unexpectedly sincere for 1, which was the right ratio. Priya's was shorter and sharper and made Victoria laugh twice. Lily had asked if she could say something, which had resulted in a brief conversation about preparation and length, and she'd stood up after Priya and said, in her clear, composed 8-year-old voice, "My dad waited a long time to be happy again." Victoria made him remember how. She sat back down. Nathan looked at the table briefly and collected himself. The evening wound down the way good evenings do. Gradually, reluctantly, people moving toward coats and cars, but not quite ready to fully release the warmth of it. Nathan stood near the windows at one point, watching the room. Victoria was across it, talking to her sister, gesturing at something. Lily was asleep in a chair in the corner, Priya's jacket over her, completely unconscious with the absolute commitment that children bring to sleeping at adult events. Marcus appeared beside Nathan with 2 glasses. "Good day," Marcus said. "Yeah. Great speech, by the way. The 2 sentences." "Thank you. I tried to read it off your notepad. I know, I saw you. And I folded the paper more carefully after that." Marcus laughed. They stood there for a moment, looking at the room together, the old, easy comfort of longtime friends who have seen each other through enough to not need to perform anything. "Remember the fire pit?" Marcus said. "Hard to forget." "I still can't believe it." He shook his head. "I made that joke about Nathan Reed being a bachelor forever, and then Nathan Reed literally went home with the person he was going to marry." He paused. "Well, not home, but Marcus." "I'm just saying the irony is excellent. Good night, Marcus. I want credit. I helped move this along with my commentary." "You absolutely did not." "I planted a seed." Nathan looked at him. "You made fun of my dinner rotation." "The rotation needed critique. That's a separate issue." Marcus raised his glass. "To the rotation, then. May it expand significantly." Nathan raised his glass. "It already has," he said, which was true. In the year since Victoria had moved in, the rotation had grown from 6 meals to something closer to 18, partly because Victoria cooked differently than he did and had introduced things he'd never made, and partly because Lily had started making requests with increasing specificity and confidence. The rotation now included a spicy coconut noodle dish that was technically Victoria's but that Nathan had made his own version of, and a complicated weekend breakfast situation that Lily had named the Saturday thing and considered non-negotiable. These were not remarkable developments. They were the texture of ordinary domestic life, the small accumulations of a household finding its shape.
Nathan had thought, before all of this, that ordinary was what you settled for when the extraordinary wasn't available. He understood now that he'd had it backwards. The ordinary was the thing. The 6-dinner rotation was not the symbol of a life that had closed down. It was the foundation of a life that was being lived. What changed wasn't the ordinariness of it. What changed was who it was ordinary with. The year after the wedding was the year things stopped being new and became simply his life, which was the best possible thing that could happen to them. The apartment settled into itself. Lily turned 9 and then 10, growing into a person with increasingly specific opinions about everything from book covers to the correct way to fold laundry, on which she and Victoria had an ongoing low-grade disagreement that Nathan stayed entirely out of on principle. Victoria's company had a better year than the year before. She hired a VP who actually matched the job, which she mentioned to Nathan one evening with the quiet satisfaction of someone who'd learned something hard and applied it. Meridian grew again, quietly, without the dramatic narrative the press had wanted for it. Victoria was good at this, at building things that lasted by not requiring them to be spectacular every quarter. She worked long hours and brought the hard days home and had learned, slowly, to put them down in the apartment rather than carry them past the front door. Nathan noticed this. The incremental trust of it, the choosing to be known inside the home rather than only managed. He noticed and said nothing directly about it because she didn't need him to narrate her growth. He just made room for it. He started running in the mornings. Not at 6:15, the time had shifted gradually as the household's rhythms changed, and the old system had relaxed into something more organic, less rigidly timed. He still had structure. He probably always would, but the structure now was built around more people than just himself and Lily, and it had to breathe differently to accommodate the weight of all of them. Some mornings he'd come back from a run to find Victoria already at the kitchen table with her laptop and her coffee, working before anyone else was awake. He'd pour a glass of water and stand at the counter and watch her for a moment. She never looked up immediately. She was always in the thing, fully submerged in whatever she was solving, and he'd feel the particular warmth of a familiar thing that had not yet stopped being remarkable to him. Then he'd pour a second cup of coffee and set it beside her laptop without a word. She'd reach for it without looking up. This was love. Not the fire pit version or the waterfront version or even the cold couch Tuesday night version. This was the version that came after all of those. The small, accumulated, daily version. The second cup of coffee. The folded laundry disagreement that was never going to be resolved. The ring on the counter by the bathroom that had led to the purchase of the ring, now on Victoria's hand. The wreath they still made every December, with Lily adding the ribbon now, with more technique than she'd had at 8, and Frank Sinatra still playing from someone's phone, and the three of them around the kitchen table making something imperfect and handmade in theirs. There were still hard things. The world did not stop having hard things because he'd found his way to happiness inside it. Victoria's company went through a rough patch in the second year that kept her distant in ways that took them a few weeks to navigate back from. Nathan's own grief for Claire surfaced sometimes in ways that still surprised him, not as the devastating thing it had been in the first years, but as a quieter ache, present and acknowledged. He talked to Victoria about it now, which was different from the years of carrying it alone. She listened in the way she listened to everything, fully, without trying to fix it or rush past it. "Do you ever worry?" he asked once, lying in the dark in the apartment that had become completely theirs, "that comparing them is something I do." She was quiet for a moment. "Do you?" "Sometimes. Not in the way that diminishes you, more like, I'll notice something that's different and realize I'm measuring." "That's going to happen," she said. "You loved her. You built a life with her. The measuring is just your brain doing its job." A pause. "As long as you tell me when it's happening. That's why I'm telling you." "I know." She was quiet for another moment. "I don't feel like I'm competing with her, Nathan. She's not here. I am. And the version of you that loved her is part of why you're the man you are now." A beat. "I don't resent any of it." He lay with that for a while. The dark apartment, the city outside the window. "She would have liked you," he said. "I've thought that a lot." "I've thought the same thing," Victoria said, "based on her daughter." He turned his head in the dark to look at her. She was looking at the ceiling, the profile of her face in the ambient light from the window. Based on her daughter, he repeated. Lily has the best of her. I can see it. So you were loved well before me, Nathan. That's not a threat. That's... She stopped, searching for the right word. That's the reason you knew how to do it again. He held that for a long time, probably long enough that she thought he'd gone to sleep. Thank you, he said, finally. For what? For seeing it that way. She reached over and found his hand in the dark. There's a thing that happens to some people, if they are lucky and patient and willing to remain open to the particular terror of caring about something after loss. And it is this. The life they rebuild becomes not a lesser version of what they had before, but a different architecture entirely. Built on the same foundation of who they are, but shaped differently by what they've survived, and inhabited with a more deliberate attention because they know in the specific way that only people who have lost something irreplaceable can know, that nothing is guaranteed to stay. Nathan Reed knew this. He carried it not as weight, but as a kind of clarity. He was not, in the years after his marriage to Victoria, a man who took the ordinary moments for granted. He didn't float through the good evenings. He was present in them. He felt the specific warmth of Lily's head on his shoulder during a movie. He noticed the way Victoria looked when she laughed at something she hadn't expected to find funny. He felt the weight of the second cup of coffee he put down beside her laptop every morning, which was small and nothing and everything. He was not, and would never be, a man without complications. His anxiety still visited. His tendency toward overcaution still required regular examination. He still occasionally had to be reminded, by Victoria, by Lily, by Marcus, by his own therapist, that control was not the same as safety, and that staying open to things was not the same as inviting catastrophe. But he was in it, fully in it. Not managing from a careful distance, not orbiting other people's warmth from behind the polished architecture of a functioning routine. He was living inside his own life, which sounds like the lowest possible bar, but which is, for certain kinds of people who have survived certain kinds of things, the hardest and most significant achievement there is. One evening in late October, 2 years after the wedding, 3 years after a fire pit in a backyard outside Seattle, Nathan sat on the balcony of the apartment while the city went about its Saturday evening business below him. The air had the particular cold, clear quality of Seattle in fall, the sky going dark at the edges. Behind him, through the glass door, he could hear Lily and Victoria arguing with cheerful intensity about something. The latest installment in Lily's ongoing campaign for a dog, he thought, by the frequency with which the word responsible appeared in Victoria's responses. He'd been out here for 10 minutes. He'd needed a breath of outside, not for any particular reason, just because some evenings asked for a moment of stillness. He thought about the man he'd been 3 years ago. The 6:15 mornings and the rotation and the 1 hour of television before bed. The careful system. The life built to stay upright rather than to move. He thought about a backyard and a fire and a joke that wasn't a joke. He thought about 4 words from a woman who had known him long enough to say them without pretense and with full knowledge of the risk. He thought about 11 minutes in a parked car, a waterfront at 7 o'clock, a bookstore, and a lopsided wreath and a piano recital in the second row, a kitchen table in March, and a photograph of Claire, a ring in a sock drawer, a cold fire pit in May, and a question asked on one knee on uneven ground. He thought about all the ways love had refused to be dramatic or convenient or timed correctly, how it had arrived sideways, in friendship, in patience, in the particular stubbornness of a woman who had decided he was worth the wait and had simply waited. Not passively, not sacrificially, just present, fully herself, available when he found his way there. He thought that the most important things in his life had not been earned through grand gestures or exceptional bravery. They had been built slowly, from honesty and showing up and the willingness to be known imperfectly, from saying, "I'm not scared," to his daughter and hearing her see through it clearly, from texting, "I miss you," before he'd decided to and having that be exactly right. The balcony door opened. Victoria stepped out, pulling the door closed behind her to keep the warmth inside. She came to stand beside him at the railing, looking at the city below. "She wants a golden retriever," Victoria said. "Specifically, a golden retriever. She did research." Of course she did research. She has a whole document. Pros, cons, required commitment level, estimated annual cost. Nathan looked at her. A 10-year-old made a spreadsheet. 11 in December, and I may have mentioned once that I find well-organized arguments persuasive. Victoria paused. I may have created a situation. You created a situation. Possibly. A beat. The argument is genuinely pretty good. Nathan looked at the city. Are we getting a dog? Victoria looked at the city too. I think we might be getting a dog. He turned to look at her. She turned to look at him. Something passed between them. The compressed shorthand of two people who have been paying attention to each other long enough to hold whole conversations in a look. And then they both started laughing at the same time, and Lily, hearing it through the glass door, opened it a crack. Are you laughing about the dog? She asked. We're not. It's not, Nathan started. We're thinking about it, Victoria said. Lily looked at them both with the considered expression of someone assessing how much to push. I'll walk it every day, she said. That's in the document. We read the document, Victoria said. And? Nathan looked at Victoria. Victoria looked at Nathan. He shrugged. Your call. She gave him the look. Don't put this on me. He smiled. She shook her head, not bothering to hide that she was also smiling. We'll talk about it this week, Victoria said, turning back to Lily, like real people having a real conversation. Lily studied them both for another moment. Then, with the uncanny accuracy of a child who has been watching adults her entire life and knows exactly what she's looking at, she said, You're going to say yes. She closed the door. They heard her footsteps retreating back into the apartment, confident and unhurried, already certain of the outcome. Nathan and Victoria stood on the balcony in the October night air. Below them, the city moved and glittered and went about its ordinary Saturday business. He put his arm around her shoulders. She leaned into his side. We're going to say yes, he said. We're absolutely going to say yes, she agreed. They stood there for a little while longer, not because there was anything else to say, just because the evening was good and the city was beautiful in its ordinary way, and there was warmth behind the glass door, his daughter moving around in it, and the woman beside him solid and real and present. He thought about what he would have told himself 3 years ago, the man with the system and the careful walls and the 11 minutes in a parked car. He thought about what that man needed to hear and whether any version of hearing it would have mattered, or whether the only way to arrive here was through every single step of the arriving. He decided it was the latter. Some things can't be told. They have to be lived at exactly the pace they need. He had been slow. He had been careful and afraid and slow. And he had gotten here. That, Nathan thought, holding his wife in the October night with his daughter inside and the city going about its business below them, was more than enough. It was, in the plainest and truest sense, everything. End.